Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I noticed the first sign of trouble when I moved into this old building 2 months ago. The elevator looked old from the moment I saw it. The metal doors rattled when they closed. The ceiling light flickered. The mirror panels on the walls were dull and scratched, and they had a strange tint. At first I thought they were just dirty, but I realized they were stained with age. They had a dark shine that made me uneasy. Every time I stepped inside late at night, I felt a shift in the air. It wasn't a breeze or a draft. It was like the cabin itself held its breath for a second. I tried to ignore it, but I kept noticing a faint outline next to me in the mirror. It never matched me or my reflection. It stood just a bit off, like a shadow that didn't belong. I couldn't see details, just a shape. Whenever the elevator door opened, it vanished. I told myself it was a trick of the light or my tired eyes. I work late and often arrive home around midnight or later. I'd press the button in the lobby, watch the old floor indicator above the doors flicker, then step inside the elevator when it finally arrived. The cables always creaked. The overhead bulb buzzed. I would lean back against the wall, exhausted. Usually, around the 4th floor, I'd catch a glimpse in the mirror. An extra shadow. It didn't move much, but it shifted a little closer every time the elevator ascended another floor. By the 7th floor, it seemed to be at my side, almost brushing against me. When the door slid open on my floor, I'd step out and the shape would be gone. I never told anyone because I thought they would laugh. I wasn't even sure if it was real. I had no evidence. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination. My job is stressful. I deal with tight deadlines every day, and I come home exhausted. My eyes burn from staring at a computer, and my head hurts. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or seeing spots, but some nights it felt more solid. I'd feel a slight chill on my left side. My hair would stand on end. I'd get goosebumps on my arms. There was no draft in that little box, but I felt cold. I started dreading the moment I pressed the elevator button in the lobby. Sometimes I wanted to take the stairs, but I live on the 12th floor. Climbing 12 flights of stairs after a long day seemed worse than risking a weird shadow in the mirror. So I kept using the elevator. I tried not to look at the mirrors, but that only made me more nervous. I'd catch a glimpse in my peripheral vision. I'd see a shapeshift. My pulse would quicken and my breathing got shallow. One night, I got home later than usual, around 2 a.m. The lobby was empty. The security desk was unstaffed at that hour. I pressed the elevator button. I heard the faint rumble as it came down from an upper floor. When it opened, I stepped inside and felt a chill right away. The air smelled stale, like old metal and damp cloth. I pressed the button for 12. The doors closed and the light flickered twice. The elevator started moving. I stared at the floor, trying to keep my eyes off the mirror. But I felt something behind me. My scalp tingled and my stomach clenched. By the time we reached the 4th floor, I felt that presence on my left side. I glanced up. In the mirror, I saw my own reflection, hunched with fatigue. Right next to me was a faint silhouette. I couldn't see details, just a dark shape. It was close enough to touch my shoulder. I swallowed hard and tried to stay calm. I told myself it was a trick of the lighting. At the 6th floor, the shadow seemed to slide closer to me. I held my breath. My palms got sweaty, and I tried to focus on the illuminated floor numbers. At the 7th floor, I could almost feel something pressing against my side. My back tensed, and I felt the hair on my neck stand up. The elevator slowed a bit, but no one got on. I exhaled and looked at the door, wishing it would hurry up and reach 12. But the elevator jerked. It stopped on the 8th floor. I stared at the numbers in confusion because I didn't press 8, and nobody else had pressed it. The door didn't open. The overhead light flickered fast. My reflection in the mirror started to waver. My face looked pale. My eyes felt drawn to the other shape in the mirror. It wasn't just a silhouette anymore. It had outlines of shoulders, arms, and a head. My heart pounded in my chest and I felt a jolt of fear shoot down my spine. I tapped the door open button. Nothing happened. I jabbed it again. The doors stayed shut. That's when the lights flickered more aggressively. Each time they turned back on, the reflection changed. I saw a figure that looked like a man in a torn suit. The fabric was ripped at the shoulders. The tie was shredded. His face was pale, with deep shadows around his eyes. His hair was messy. He stared straight at me with a half smile that made my throat tighten. I scrambled for the emergency button. I pressed it, hoping to hear some alarm. The elevator rang a dull bell, but nothing else happened. The cabin felt colder with each passing second. I let out a shaky breath and tried pressing the floor buttons again. Nothing responded. I looked back at the mirror. The figure was still there, now standing in my spot like we had switched places. My reflection was gone. He was there instead, smiling but not blinking. My hands started shaking. I wiped sweat off my forehead. The lights flickered again, and he vanished, replaced by the usual mirror image of me. Then in a quick flash, he was back, right behind me. I could see his grin in the mirror, but I felt nothing behind me in the real cabin. I turned around, but there was no one. Yet in the reflection, he was inches from my face, looking over my shoulder. I felt a cold sensation on my back, like someone put ice directly on my spine. I wanted to shout, but my voice got stuck. The overhead light buzzed, dimmed, then returned. The figure's eyes were on mine in the mirror. He lifted his hand in the reflection and placed it on my shoulder. I felt a sudden pressure on that exact spot. I jumped to the side, my heart racing. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't get a full breath. I slapped the walls of the elevator, trying to get someone's attention. I banged on the doors. I yelled for help. No response. The building was probably asleep. I wiped my palms on my pants and looked at the floor indicators again. They were dead. The elevator was stuck between the 8th and 9th floors. The overhead light kept blinking. I felt trapped in a box with something that shouldn't exist. I pressed the emergency bell again and again. I tried using the small intercom, but it just crackled. I couldn't understand any words. I only heard faint static and distant pops. I whispered, "Hello? Anyone?" But no one answered. A deep, quiet laughter came from behind me. It sounded muffled, like it was coming through a thick wall, yet it was inside the cabin. My skin prickled. I turned around, but there was no one. In the mirror, though, the man stood there. His face looked closer to mine than before. He wasn't laughing, but I heard laughter again, as if he was mocking me. I noticed his eyes. They were sunken, dark, and lifeless. The corners of his mouth were curled upward, but his expression looked more like a sneer than a smile. I tried to step away, but I hit the back wall. The cabin felt cramped. I stared at the closed elevator doors, wondering if I could pry them open. I tried to wedge my fingers in the narrow gap. I pulled, and my arms shook with effort, but it didn't budge. My lungs felt tight. I told myself to stay calm. I looked back at the mirror. The man's expression changed. His mouth hung open slightly, revealing teeth that looked normal, but his lips were cracked. I felt my legs shaking. I tried hitting the door again, but I only heard hollow sounds from the metal. My thoughts raced. I wanted to get out of there. I wanted fresh air and to see a normal hallway. The lights flickered again, and the figure disappeared. My own reflection came back. I stood there breathing hard. I brushed my hand across my shoulder, expecting to feel something. There was nothing but the dampness of my sweaty shirt. My neck felt stiff. My ears rang. Then I heard that low laughter again, closer this time. The elevator shook like the cables were shifting. I braced myself and almost lost my balance. The reflection changed again. The man was back. He looked at me with a calm expression, as if he was waiting for me to do something. I felt a surge of panic. My mind raced. I tried pressing every button on the panel. The cabin lurched. I heard a mechanical whine. Then, with a jolt, it began moving upward. It moved so slowly that I wondered if it was going to stop again at any second. The overhead light stopped flickering. It stayed on, but it was dimmer than usual. My reflection remained normal for a few seconds. Then, as we passed the 9th floor, the shape reappeared in the mirror. It was faint, but there. The man in the suit had stepped back from me. He was standing against the back wall of the elevator in the reflection. His head was tilted to one side. I tried to ignore him, but I felt chills across my whole body. I stared at the floor indicator, which was lit again. We reached the 10th floor, then the 11th. My heart pounded as we approached the 12th. I prayed the doors would open. At the 12th floor, the cabin halted with a thud. The doors opened. I stumbled out into the hallway. I nearly tripped on the hallway carpet. I turned around to see if the figure was in the elevator. Inside the cabin, the mirror showed only me, except I was no longer inside. There was no one in that reflection. The shape was gone. I stood there, breathing like I had run a marathon. The hallway was empty. The overhead lights were normal. The air felt warmer. I waited a few seconds, expecting the elevator doors to close. They remained open, and the overhead light in the elevator flickered again. I took a step closer, but something in me hesitated. I felt queasy thinking about going back in there. I didn't hear any laughter anymore. Then slowly, the elevator doors slid shut. I heard the lift descend. I stayed in the hallway, trying to calm myself. I walked to my apartment, locked the door, and dropped my bag on the floor. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble putting my key down. I headed to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked exhausted and spooked, but at least I didn't see any dark figures behind me. I took a few deep breaths and tried to steady my pulse. Then I changed into clean clothes and sat on my couch. I stared at the ceiling, listening for any strange noises. Everything was quiet. I thought about calling someone, maybe the building's maintenance number, but it was late, and I doubted anyone would respond. I also thought about calling a friend, but I didn't know what I would say. I saw a strange man in the elevator mirror, and the elevator got stuck. It sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't forget the pressure on my shoulder or the coldness that lingered in the cabin. I decided I would take the stairs in the morning. I didn't want to go near that elevator again. I didn't sleep well that night. I tossed and turned, dreaming about silent floors and endless hallways. I woke up in a sweat more than once. Sure, I heard that muffled laughter in my bedroom, but it was just my imagination. The next day, I left for work by the stairwell. I was out of breath by the time I reached the ground floor, but at least I felt safe. I avoided the elevator for the rest of the week. Whenever I came home, I climbed the stairs. It was tiring, but I didn't want to step inside that metal box. My legs ached, and I realized I couldn't avoid it forever. The building management posted a note saying the elevator was being checked for electrical issues. I overheard someone mention it got stuck on the 8th floor, but they blamed it on a power surge. I never told anyone the full story. I don't want to explain the strange figure or the laughter. I don't want them to think I'm out of my mind. But I can't forget that cold stare in the mirror, and I can't forget the feeling of that hand on my shoulder. Even now, when the elevator is supposedly fixed, I still take the stairs most days. I'm afraid that if I step inside at night, I'll see that shape again. I'll feel that cold presence creeping closer, floor by floor, and I'll hear that quiet laughter when the doors refuse to open. I never expected a simple radio experiment to shake me so badly. I've been running a small makeshift studio at home for a few years, mostly to entertain myself and a handful of friends who tune in. I've had my share of weird static and unexplained beeps late at night, but nothing ever felt personal. Then I heard a voice on a low frequency around 3 in the morning. It said my name. It repeated my old street address. It sounded like it knew me. I didn't recognize the speaker. The words were slow and drawn out, like someone was whispering across a huge distance. From that moment on, I couldn't shake a sense of dread every time I sat down at my console. My name is Lucas. I'm 35 years old. I work at a small office downtown during the day, and I run my amateur radio setup at night because I like the challenge. I set it up in my spare room with foam panels on the walls, second-hand microphones, and a custom-built transmitter. I'm not a professional, but I know enough to keep things running smoothly. I stay away from official or restricted bands, and I mostly broadcast music or talk about local events. Nobody pays me. It's just a hobby that helps me relax. But about 3 weeks ago, I decided to experiment with lower frequencies than usual. I had a hunch I might pick up some hidden signal or catch some long-distance chatter. That night, I brewed a pot of coffee because I planned to stay up until dawn. I felt a bit tired but still curious. I wore sweatpants and an old t-shirt, and I sat in my squeaky chair with my headphones on. Around 2:45 a.m., I started to sweep through frequencies step by step. At first, I got faint static and occasional pops. Sometimes I'd hear bits of music or a fragment of a voice. After a while, I stopped on something that sounded like a low hiss. It seemed constant, so I tried to see if there was any pattern. Then it changed. The hiss thinned out, and I heard a single word. My name. Lucas. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. I felt my muscles tighten. I thought I imagined it. I waited a few seconds. My heart was pounding. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. Then the voice came again. Lucas. I yanked off my headphones and stared at the console. My pulse was thumping in my ears. I put the headphones back on slowly. The voice said my name again. Then it mentioned a detail from my past. The street where I grew up before I moved out at 18. There was no reason for anyone to know that over some random frequency. I felt my scalp tighten. It was a strange, cold fear. My mouth went dry, and I looked around the room like I expected someone to be there. No one was. I tried to switch frequencies. I twisted the dial and moved to a different band. The voice vanished for a moment, replaced by static. I breathed out, trying to calm down. Then, in the middle of the static, the voice returned. It said my name again, more urgently. I shut off the transmitter. I sat there in silence, listening to my own breath. My fingers trembled. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and drank a glass of water. I told myself it was some bizarre prank. Maybe a neighbor had messed with my signal. I had no proof, and it seemed impossible, but I couldn't think of any better explanation. I went to bed around 4 in the morning, but I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering the exact tone of that voice. It was low, almost monotone, with a distant echo. Every time it repeated my name, I felt a pinch in my chest. It made me question who would know that old address. My parents moved away from that place years ago, and I never talked about it on my broadcasts. I tossed and turned until sunrise, then drifted into a light sleep. When I finally got up, I felt exhausted. My body ached and my eyes burned. At work, I tried to focus on my usual tasks, but I kept thinking about that voice. I replayed the audio in my mind, the odd hiss that preceded it, the empty static behind it. My coworker asked if I was feeling sick, and I just shrugged. I mumbled something about a rough night. I didn't want to share what happened. It sounded too crazy. I stared at my screen and pushed through the day. That evening, I hesitated before stepping back into my makeshift studio. The foam panels on the wall looked the same as always. I turned on the overhead light and stared at the dials on my console. My coffee mug from the previous night still sat on the table, half full and cold. I decided I'd do a simple broadcast, maybe some local news I pulled from the paper. Nothing fancy. I turned the knobs and set up my normal frequency. I cleared my throat and started talking into the mic. My voice cracked. I felt uneasy and tense. I forced myself to keep going, listing traffic updates and a small bit about the local hardware store. The broadcast lasted about half an hour. After I was done, I switched off the mic. I was about to reach for the frequency dial. Then the static rose in my headphones, a sudden rush of noise. My pulse sped up again. I froze. Under the static, something shifted, like a distant hum. I pulled the headphones away from my ears, but I still heard it. It was faint, but the voice was there. I couldn't make out any words. I switched frequencies again, turning the dial fast. The static changed pitch, but the hum stayed there, following me. I took off the headphones and walked out of the room. I shut the door behind me and rubbed my face with both hands. I felt shaky. My mouth tasted bitter. That night, I slept badly again. I woke up twice, sweating. Around 3 in the morning, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I was standing in a dark hall. There was a figure covered in shifting static, like the silhouette of a person, but made of swirling specks. Each time it stepped forward, the static hissed louder. I couldn't see a face, but I sensed it was looking at me. My heart pounded and I tried to step back, but I couldn't move. The figure reached out, and I saw a faint outline of fingers in the static. Then its head tilted. The static around its face started to shift into a shape that resembled my features. Suddenly it spoke. It said my words from earlier that night, repeating my entire broadcast. I woke up gasping for air. My bedsheets were damp from sweat. I sat up in bed. My hands were shaking. My breath came in quick bursts. I turned on the bedside lamp. The light made me feel a bit safer, but I couldn't calm down. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through social media, trying to distract myself. My mouth was dry and my heart kept racing. I ended up dozing off around 5, only to wake up again for work at 7. The next few days were rough. I avoided low frequencies entirely. I tried to stick to my usual spots on the spectrum. Still, I heard that hum sometimes. I'd be in the middle of a short broadcast and I'd notice a faint static in the background. My name would slip through the noise, or I'd catch a whisper of some memory from when I was a teenager. It never lasted long enough for me to record it properly. Whenever I attempted to capture it with my software, it stopped. It felt like the voice was playing games with me. My stomach was in knots every time I flipped on the power. One afternoon, I decided to dismantle part of my setup. I removed a few components, hoping that I could block the mysterious signal. I replaced cables, checked my grounding wires, and even tested my antenna outside. Nothing looked broken or tampered with. Everything was normal. When I put it back together and tested it that evening, the static came through as soon as I switched to the lower bands. The voice drifted in and said, "Lucas, you can't hide." I felt a rush of panic. My chest got tight, and I struggled to breathe evenly. I shut everything down and went to the living room. I slumped on the couch with the TV on, volume low, just to have some normal background noise. My mind kept returning to that voice. It felt targeted, like it wasn't just random interference. It knew things about me. It mentioned secrets I told no one. It repeated details about my life that I never discussed on air. That night, I had another nightmare about the static figure. It was closer this time. My perspective was different. I saw myself sitting at the radio console in my dream, hunched over the microphone. The figure stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder. The static crept around my face, almost blending with my hair. Then I saw the figure's face shift again, forming my own expression. I jolted awake, panting, with my heart pounding like I had run a marathon. I was soaked in sweat, and my skin prickled with goosebumps. I sat on the edge of my bed, rubbing my arms, trying to calm down. I started avoiding my studio. I only went inside during the day when I felt safer. Even then, I kept the lights on. I moved the chair so I could see the door. I looked over my shoulder a lot, checking for any sign of movement. My imagination ran wild. I'd hear a short burst of static from the console, even when it was off. I'd freeze and stare at the equipment, half expecting the voice to call me again. I thought about removing the entire setup from my home, but I felt attached to it. I also worried about what would happen if I tried to run. Would the voice follow me in some other way? 2 weeks into this ordeal, I decided to face it. I planned to do a full night in the studio, searching for the source of the voice. I set up a recording device, tested my software, and kept a notepad ready to jot down times and frequencies. I made sure every cable was secure. My plan was to scan through the entire lower band, inch by inch, and record everything. If the voice appeared, I'd capture it. If it revealed more details about my past, I'd have proof. Maybe I could show it to an audio expert or share it online. I sat there from midnight until almost 3 a.m. My eyes got heavy, and my back ached from sitting. The static was constant. Occasionally I heard faint signals, but nothing that sounded like a voice. I started to suspect I might have imagined it all, or maybe the phenomenon had stopped. I was about to give up and go to bed. Then the noise in my headphones shifted. The hum came through again, like a wave rising from deep water. I inhaled sharply. My stomach clenched. I kept the recorder running. The voice said my name again. Lucas. Then it recited a personal secret from my past, something I never admitted to anyone. I felt a jolt in my gut. My throat went dry. The voice was calm, direct. It paused, and I heard static. Then it repeated the secret, word for word. My mind went blank with fear. I stared at the console, but I couldn't move my hands. My whole body tensed. My breath came in shallow gasps. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Then the voice said, "Why do you hide?" I tried to speak into the microphone, but my words came out ragged. I managed to say, "Who are you?" My voice trembled. There was a short crackle of static, then silence. I waited. My palm was slick with sweat on the console. My knees felt weak. The headphones buzzed with empty noise. The voice didn't answer. I played back the recording. I heard a faint hiss, but the voice was gone. My words were there, shaky, asking who it was. That was it. I slammed my fist on the table. I felt frustrated and angry, but mostly scared. It was like the signal wouldn't let me capture it. I yanked off the headphones and shut everything down. I couldn't stand being in that room another second. My lungs burned because I was breathing too fast. I hurried to my bedroom and locked the door. I leaned against it, heart hammering. I haven't destroyed my equipment, but I've stopped using the lower frequencies. I still hear that faint hum sometimes, especially late at night. I'll be drifting off in bed when I think I hear it through the wall. Sometimes I get so tense my shoulders hurt. I worry that if I turn on those frequencies again, the voice will come back stronger. The nightmares haven't stopped. I still see the static figure in my dreams. Sometimes it's behind me in a mirror, sometimes it's standing in the corner waiting for me to speak. I always wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, feeling like I'm still being watched. I don't know if I'm going to keep broadcasting. Part of me wants to walk away from the hobby. Another part of me wants answers. I keep wondering who or what is behind that voice. It knows things about me. It knows how to slip into any frequency I try. It has no concern for privacy. It doesn't care about my comfort or sanity. It follows me whenever it wants. I can't prove it to anyone. I can't escape it by changing channels. That night changed something in me. Even in daylight, I feel unsettled. I check over my shoulder in the office. I jump at small sounds. I'm telling this story because I need to put it into words. If I bottle it up, I'll lose my mind. I heard a voice on the radio that shouldn't exist. It called me by name. It told me secrets only I knew. It found me no matter where I went on the dial. And now it's in my dreams. I can't pretend everything is normal. I feel its presence in the static, watching me, waiting for me to respond. I don't know if I ever will, but I'm certain of one thing. I'll never forget the night I heard my name through that hiss. And I realized that some signals carry more than just sound. They carry something that crawls right into your mind and refuses to leave. I woke up on my second night in the new apartment with a jolt. A loud pounding sound echoed through the bedroom wall. It came in short bursts, then stopped, then started again. My heart pounded. I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. The sound went silent for a moment. Then it started again, behind the same wall. like someone was hitting the concrete from the inside. I slid out of bed, walked toward the wall, and placed my hand against the cool surface. The vibration passed right through my palm. I yanked my hand back and stared at the spot. I had no idea what to do. It was 2 a.m, and I was alone in a new building. I didn't know any neighbors, and I felt strange calling the police over something like this. So I returned to bed and tried to sleep. The pounding continued for an hour, then faded. I stared at the ceiling and just waited for daylight. I moved into this apartment because I wanted a clean start. The place was in a busy part of the city. The building looked solid from the outside. The hallway smelled of fresh paint. My unit was on the 6th floor, facing a courtyard that didn't see much sun. The rent was reasonable, and the manager seemed helpful. There were no immediate signs of trouble when I first visited. I liked the layout. It was compact, but had a decent kitchen and a living room with enough space for a sofa and a small TV stand. The bedroom was narrow, but I figured it would work. The walls looked fine at first. I noticed some faint marks, but the manager said the previous tenant had hung up pictures. I didn't think anything of it. The strangeness became obvious after a few days. I was settling into a routine. I came home from work, made a quick dinner, and watched TV. One night, I spotted deeper scratches near the corner of the living room wall. They formed a strange pattern, almost circular. My first thought was that maybe it was leftover damage from moving the previous tenant's furniture. I leaned in close and ran my finger along the grooves. They felt sharp, as if someone had dug into the plaster with a screwdriver. Then I spotted faded words above them. They were smudged, impossible to read clearly, but I could make out one partial phrase. Within the walls. It sent a chill through me. I tried to rub it off with a damp cloth, but the marks stayed. A few days later, they got darker on their own. I decided to paint over them. I bought a small can of white paint, a roller, and some primer. I took time on a Saturday to prepare the wall. It took a few coats, but eventually it looked clean. I let it dry and checked it the next morning. The wall looked smooth. I felt relieved. But 2 nights later, I got up for a glass of water around midnight. I turned on the living room light. The symbols were back and they looked clearer. The lines had more definition. The words I had partially made out seemed darker. I could almost read them, but my mind didn't process the letters fast enough before my eyes darted away. My stomach felt tight. My hands were shaking. I left the living room light on and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. The next night, the banging returned. This time it sounded like it came from more than one spot. I heard it from the living room wall, then the bedroom wall, then somewhere near the closet. It moved around. I followed the noise, pressing my ear to different spots. The concrete felt cold. Every time I leaned close, the pounding jumped to a new wall. It was like it wanted me to chase it. Eventually, I felt dizzy from running around the apartment in the dark. I sat on the couch, breathing quickly, and turned on every lamp. The pounding stopped right after I did that. I stayed awake until morning watching the walls. During the day, the apartment felt normal. Light came in from the windows. Traffic noise drifted up from the streets below. I went to work. I returned home in the evening. Nothing happened for a while. Then, just as I started to relax, something would scrape inside the walls. The sound was faint. It reminded me of metal dragging across concrete, but it didn't come from any visible pipes or ducts. I stood there trying to track the direction. I couldn't find an exact spot. My pulse started to race. It was a constant feeling of being on edge. The nights became worse. I saw flickers of movement in the corners. The corners seemed narrower. The hallway near the bathroom felt longer than before. I tried to measure it with footsteps, but my count changed each time. Sometimes it took 4 steps to get from the kitchen to the bathroom door, other times 5 or 6. I thought I was just tired or distracted. One evening, I was washing dishes when I noticed the living room wall shift in the corner of my eye. I turned off the faucet and looked. The corner of the room seemed off. I approached it slowly. The corner had gained a small indent like a tiny archway, but it led nowhere. I walked forward, reached out, and my fingertips touched solid wall. I blinked and stepped back. The indent wasn't there anymore. My chest felt tight and I couldn't breathe well for a moment. I put the dish towel down and checked the front door. It was locked. I locked the chain as well. I didn't understand why, but I felt I needed more than a simple lock to keep myself safe. I couldn't explain who or what I thought I was defending myself against, but I felt safer with that chain in place. Over the next week, the apartment started to feel like a maze. At night, I would get up for water, walk into the living room, and find that the hallway to the bedroom looked longer than usual. Sometimes I turned around and the kitchen doorway looked narrower. My head felt strange, like I was constantly off balance. I tried to ignore it at first. I kept telling myself it was stress from work or a trick of the light, but the walls seemed to pulse in the dim light of the lamps. I spent more nights awake than asleep, always listening for the next round of banging. When it came, it felt close, as if it were inside my head. I wanted to move out, but my savings were low, and the lease was tight. I tried to talk to the manager. He shrugged and said the building was old and pipes sometimes banged. I didn't mention the shifting hallways or the marks reappearing under the paint. I left feeling frustrated. I decided to scrape off the strange symbols once more. I wanted to do a thorough job. I bought a heavy-duty scraper, primer, and stronger paint. On a Saturday morning, I opened the windows wide, moved all the furniture away from the walls, and spent hours scraping. The marks seemed embedded deep. Tiny flakes of plaster fell to the floor. The shapes were more complicated than I realized. Swirls, lines, partial circles, and words that looked almost like commands. I couldn't read them fully, but some letters appeared in bold relief, like they had been burned into the wall from the inside. My arms got tired, and my back started to ache. By late afternoon, I had removed a good section of the damage. I applied primer and let it dry. Then I painted several coats of white. By nightfall, the wall looked new again. My hands were covered in dust, and I felt exhausted. I cleaned up, took a shower, and tried to go to bed early. Around 2 a.m, a crashing sound in the living room woke me up. I jumped out of bed, flipped on the bedroom light, and ran down the hallway. My stomach lurched. The living room walls were covered in fresh scratches. They weren't just near the corner. They stretched from the ceiling to the floor. Words I'd never seen before glowed in the lamplight. My coffee table was overturned. I have no idea how. My windows were still locked from the inside, and the door chain was in place. Nothing else in the apartment looked disturbed. Just the living room. My heart hammered. I stood there for a minute, scanning every inch of the room. The walls around me seemed to close in. I backed away and went to the door. I opened it and looked into the hallway outside my apartment. It was empty. The corridor was lit by a single overhead light, and everything looked normal out there. I closed the door, locked it, and paced around my apartment. My breath came in short gasps. I rubbed my hands together. My palms were sweaty. I had no idea what was happening to me. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, not sure when I had fallen asleep. My eyes felt itchy and dry. I looked at the walls again. The new scratches were still there, deep and sharp. I ran my fingers over them. My fingertip hurt from the rough edges. I tried to keep my hand steady, but it trembled. I spent the day searching the walls for any cracks or hidden doors, convinced there must be something physically wrong with the structure. I tapped on various spots. Some areas sounded hollow, like there was empty space behind them. Others felt solid. I tried to find some pattern. Nothing made sense. My mind raced with questions, but I had no good answers. At night, I started seeing corridors that weren't part of my apartment. I would get up to use the bathroom, then turn a corner that led to a stretch of hallway with blank doors on each side. After I took a few steps, the corridor seemed to twist. Then I'd notice my bedroom door was right behind me, even though I hadn't turned around. My muscles felt tense. My scalp tingled as I tried to figure out where I was. I'd take a few more steps, and the corridor would lead me back into the living room. My legs shook. I hated every moment of it. After a while, I just stayed in bed, but then I felt the walls shifting around me. even if I couldn't see it. Sometimes I heard the scraping noise and a faint whisper, but I couldn't make out any distinct words. I focused on my breathing. I reminded myself I was awake and in my apartment. One evening I actually tried to leave in the middle of the night. I put on shoes, grabbed my coat, and headed to the front door. I unlocked the chain, opened the door, and stepped out. The hallway outside felt too long. The elevator seemed far away and the walls looked the same on both sides. I walked forward, keeping my eyes on the elevator sign. It stayed the same distance from me. My chest was tight. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. I backed up, turned around, and reached for my apartment door handle. But the door was gone. I froze. I touched the wall where my door should be. It was solid. I had a moment of panic and started knocking on the wall, hoping a neighbor would hear. I heard my own knocking echo, but no one answered. Then the door just appeared again, like it slid back into place. I stumbled inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. I couldn't speak. I just sank to the floor and covered my face with my hands. The next morning, I found the door in its normal place. I carefully opened it, looked into the hallway, and saw everything in its usual position. The elevator was only a few steps away, and the hallway had its regular length. I left for work, feeling a headache in the back of my skull. At work, I tried to focus on tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to the events of the night. I considered calling a friend, but I felt uneasy about explaining the situation. My nights continued in the same pattern. I heard pounding behind the walls, scraping sounds, and faint voices. The walls kept shifting whenever I tried to move around at night. I woke up covered in sweat many times. I noticed the living room walls had even deeper marks. The words were partially visible, though I couldn't read them fully. I started sleeping with the lights on. It only helped a little. The illusion still happened, but I felt better being able to see my surroundings. My eyes ached from the constant brightness, and my body felt weak from lack of restful sleep. One night I got up to grab a glass of water. I saw a narrow passage in place of my living room wall. It was lined with rough concrete, and it led to a small room with no windows. I stepped inside, holding my phone's flashlight. The air felt stale. I heard banging from behind the walls like it was right next to me. I spun around and aimed the light at the corners. I didn't see any figures or creatures. The floor was bare concrete. I touched the walls and they felt damp. My breathing sounded loud in my own ears. Then, in a blink, the passage was gone. I stood in my normal living room, facing the usual wall, with my phone still shining a light on white paint. That was the last time I tried to explore those impossible spaces. Now I just stay in one spot when the pounding begins. I sit on the couch, or I stay in bed, and I try to stay calm. I keep the lights on all night. Sometimes the banging stops early. Sometimes it goes on until dawn. The walls still have marks, and fresh ones appear. I've given up on painting them. The manager won't believe me if I complain again. I just keep quiet and plan my exit when my lease ends. Until then, I survive night by night, listening to the sounds and waiting for morning. Sometimes I wonder if the walls want me to follow them, deeper into those hidden rooms and twisting hallways. But I've decided not to. I don't know what's back there, and I don't plan to find out. I'll live with the pounding and the shifting walls for now. That's the only way I can get through the nights. I remind myself that morning will come, and I'll see the real shape of my apartment again, even if it changes the moment the sun goes down. I still remember the moment I first saw that corridor in my dream. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't see any end to that space. It was just me, a hallway of mirrors on both sides, and a growing sense of something wrong. I felt like I had stepped into a place where I didn't belong and there was no way back. That feeling tightened my chest right away. My heart started pounding so hard I could almost hear it in my ears. Every time I have this dream, the feeling is the same. I've been having this dream for a few weeks. It always starts the same way. I'm standing in the middle of a long corridor. It's lined with these tall, frameless mirrors that stretch from the floor to a ceiling that seems too high for a normal building. The floor is cold against my feet. I look down and I can't see any cracks or seams in the surface. It's smooth like polished stone. I can see my reflection in the floor, but it's not as clear as the reflections in the mirrors. The lighting comes from above, but I can't see any fixtures. It just seems like the place is lit by some dull white glow. It's not bright, but I can see everything well enough. The first thing I do is look at myself. I see my own reflection, but it feels strange. My features are the same, but there's something about my face that doesn't match what I usually see in a normal mirror. Maybe my eyes look darker, or maybe my mouth is set in a flat line that I don't recall. I try to move my arms and the reflection moves at the same time. For a second, I think it's all normal. Then I notice that my reflection's blink is off by a fraction of a second. I blink, and the reflection blinks just after me. That throws me off balance. My stomach tenses and my breathing quickens. It's not the way a mirror image is supposed to behave. I take a few steps forward. Each step echoes in the hallway. There's a faint clack as my shoes make contact with the ground. With every step, I expect to reach a new section or a turn, but the corridor just keeps going. More mirrors, more reflections. Each mirror shows me from a slightly different angle. At first, I see only one reflection in each mirror, but then I notice something different in one of them. At the edge of my vision, I spot a second reflection. That second reflection is me, but it's standing at a different angle than my actual body. I stop and turn around. There's nothing behind me except an endless line of mirrors and the same cold floor. When I look back at that particular mirror, it's just me in the center again. I feel my pulse skip. My breath gets shallow. I try to calm myself by rubbing my hands together. I decide to keep moving. I place one foot in front of the other, slowly. I don't hear anything except my own steps and my breathing. My throat feels dry, and there's a tightness at the base of my neck. The mirrors go on forever. Each mirror stands about half a foot from the next one, with barely any space in between. I see infinite copies of myself in the reflection, stretching into the distance. Usually, mirror corridors show an illusion of infinity, but this one feels too real. I can almost sense the presence of each reflection. My neck hairs stand up and my palms feel damp. I stare directly ahead. I want to find a door or some sign of an exit. Nothing appears. There's no doorknob, no handle, no panel. Just mirror after mirror. I try to see if there's a wall behind the mirrors, but I can't. It looks like each mirror is freestanding, anchored to the floor. I run my fingers lightly across one of them, and the surface is smooth and cold. It's so clear that I feel like I might be able to push through it. I test that idea and press against it. It doesn't budge. It's solid, but I get a weird chill in my fingertips. Suddenly, in one mirror, my reflection lifts its left arm while I keep my arms at my sides. I freeze. My heart thumps so hard in my chest that it actually hurts. The reflection holds its arm up, palm facing me, as though signaling me to stop. I stare at it and I can't move for a second. My mouth goes dry. The reflection's eyes are locked on mine. Then I hear a soft, scraping sound. I realize it's coming from the mirror itself, like fingernails against glass. The reflection is pressing its fingernails against the surface. I watch tiny lines form on the other side, almost like scratches. I step back, but the reflection doesn't lower its arm. It keeps staring right at me. I feel sweat trickle down the side of my face. My breathing gets heavier. I glance to my right, hoping the reflection there is normal, but it isn't. The reflection on that side is grinning, and I'm not. My own face is set in a grim expression, lips tight, brows furrowed. Meanwhile, that reflection shows a crooked smile, revealing a little bit of teeth. Its hands are pressed to the glass and it's shifting its weight like it wants to break out. My mind races with questions. I don't understand how my reflections are doing things I'm not doing. My skin feels cold and there's a tingling in my fingers. I'm tempted to run. I take a few steps back, trying to keep my eyes on the reflections. My footsteps echo even louder now, and it feels like the corridor is somehow smaller. I turn around to see if there's any path behind me, but it looks the same. More mirrors, more reflections. Some of them are normal, mirroring my every move. Others are not. One tilts its head too far as if examining me. Another has its eyes locked on me with an expression like it's sizing me up. My chest feels tight, and I can't catch a full breath. I think about yelling or calling for help, but I don't see any point. There's no sign of anyone else, no sign of a way out. I swallow hard and my throat clicks. I can taste bitterness in the back of my mouth. I keep walking forward. Every step feels heavier than the last, like my legs are moving through mud. My mind is screaming at me to find a way out. I watch the mirrors as I pass. Many show me standing still, arms at my sides, face drawn in tension. Others do something else entirely. Some wave at me, some knock on the glass. I hear dull thumps as if they're trying to break through. That makes me move faster. I start jogging. My feet slap the floor, and the echo bounces around the corridor. My breath comes in gasps. My arms swing at my sides, sweat gathering under my shirt. After a while, I notice something ahead. It looks like a corner or a small turn. Relief swells in my chest. I push myself to run faster. As I get closer, I see it's just another section of hallway that juts to the left. When I turn the corner, I see more of the same. Mirrors on both sides, infinite reflections, no exit. I feel a jolt of panic in my gut. My jaw tightens, and I clench my fists. The air in here smells like cold metal. My breath leaves a slight fog on the nearest mirror. I step toward one mirror and press my palm flat against it. The glass feels slightly warm this time, unlike before. My reflection's hand meets mine. At first it moves with me like a normal reflection. Then its fingers tap the glass from the other side. I can hear each tap. I recoil, stumbling back. My reflection's lips part, and I see the corners of its mouth curl upward in a sly grin. It doesn't speak. I can't hear any words, but its eyes follow me. I hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven. I want to run again, but I'm exhausted from the constant tension. My thighs burn and my back feels tight. I keep my distance from the mirrors. I walk forward slowly, using the center of the corridor. I look straight ahead, trying to ignore the flickers of motion I catch in my peripheral vision. The reflections are all doing something different. I see them raising arms, turning heads, or pressing their faces close to the glass. I hear more scraping. My ears ring with the noise. The corridor feels cramped. I feel trapped. My fingers are numb, and my mind is stuck on the possibility that these reflections might break free. At some point, I see the reflection directly in front of me place its forehead against the mirror. Its eyes are rolled back, and it's breathing heavily, fogging up the glass from the other side. That stops me in my tracks. My heart slams against my ribs. I can't believe what I'm seeing. It's so close that I can see small details. Its skin is a bit paler than mine. Its eyes are bloodshot. I'm shaking now. My arms feel weak. I back away, and the reflection in the mirror to my left reaches out and touches the glass, as if beckoning me. I spin around. I want an escape. I see nothing but more mirrors and twisting corridors. I start to run again, ignoring the ache in my muscles. I sprint for what feels like a long time, passing mirror after mirror. The scraping sounds follow me. I catch glimpses of reflections with wild eyes or clenched teeth. My breath comes in gasps and the sweat rolls down my forehead. I want to scream, but my throat tightens. I hold back any noise, worried it might make things worse. The corridor keeps extending. It doesn't matter how far I run. There's always more. The reflections become more aggressive. Some pound on the glass. Some press their faces so hard that I see their skin flatten. I worry the glass might crack. I feel my stomach churn. My head is light. I'm sure I'm dreaming at this point, but it doesn't change how real it all feels. My heart hurts from the frantic beating. My temples throb. The air feels stuffy, and I can't get enough oxygen. I wipe my face with my sleeve, but my sleeve is damp with sweat. My legs are heavy, but I can't stop. I keep moving because I'm terrified they'll break out. After more running, I slow down again. I don't have the energy to keep sprinting. I double over, resting my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. My lungs burn. My shirt sticks to my skin. The corridor is silent for a moment, except for my panting. I look up at the mirror in front of me. The reflection is normal at first glance, matching my hunched posture and sweat-soaked shirt. Then it smirks. My reflection stands up straight, even though I'm still leaning forward. It's mocking me. My chest tightens. I clench my teeth. I reach out and smack the mirror with my palm, but it stays solid. The reflection just watches me. It shakes its head like it's disappointed. I feel a jolt of anger rise up. I slam the mirror again, but nothing happens except for a dull thud. My frustration boils. I shout at it, "Stop it!" My voice echoes, but there's no response. The reflection just keeps staring. Then I notice some of the other mirrors around me. The reflections in them are still, as if waiting. My voice fades and silence fills the corridor. It's like they're all listening. My heart races again. I don't know what they're waiting for. I take one step back. My reflection in the center mirror steps forward, but I'm not moving forward. My mind spins. I breathe fast. I feel a cold sweat break out across my forehead. The reflection presses its hand on the glass from the inside. I watch its fingers curl, almost like it's gripping the inside surface. The glass flexes outward in a slight bulge. I stumble backward, shaking my head. "No," I whisper. I'm terrified. My mouth tastes like acid. I turn and run again. My shoes squeak on the floor. My breath rasps in my throat. I don't care which direction I choose, I just want distance. The corridor's mirrors blur in my vision. The thumping behind the glass continues. My ears buzz. My legs feel like they're on fire, and my arms pump at my sides. I keep my eyes forward, ignoring everything else. At some point, I trip over my own feet and collapse onto the floor. My knees slam against the hard surface, and I grunt in pain. My hands sting from the impact. I push myself up, wincing, and look around. The corridor is spinning in my view. My stomach does a flip, and I nearly retch. I fight the urge to vomit and press on, stumbling forward. Suddenly, the corridor goes dark. The lights flicker overhead. It's just for a second, but my heart seizes in my chest. I hate the darkness. When it brightens again, I notice the reflections are closer to the glass. Their eyes are bigger, more focused. I can hear them breathing. It's shallow and uneven. I feel my mind slip into panic. I close my eyes for a split second, trying to shut out the sight. When I open them, the corridor is still the same, but now I sense movement behind the mirrors. I want to wake up. I know it's a dream, but it feels too real. My muscles ache and my teeth chatter. I tell myself to calm down. I slap my own face, hoping it will jar me awake. Nothing happens. I keep slapping until my cheek stings. I look into the nearest mirror. My reflection does it too, but just a second too late. My vision blurs with tears, and I wipe them away, frustrated and afraid. Then I hear a loud crack. I freeze. The noise resonates through the corridor. I look around, searching for the source. One of the mirrors in front of me has a hairline fracture. It's thin, but it runs right down the center. My reflection on that mirror is smiling. A second crack appears, branching off from the first one. My pulse pounds. I feel a wave of nausea. I don't want to see what happens next, so I turn and run. That's when I feel everything shift. The corridor seems to tilt. My head spins. My eyes flutter, and I jolt awake in bed. I sit up, gasping for air. My sheets are damp with sweat. My heart is racing and my arms are shaking. I look around my bedroom. It's quiet. The moonlight comes through the window and I can hear a car outside. I try to catch my breath. My temples throb. I wipe the sweat off my face with the back of my hand. My chest feels tight, and I'm so relieved to be awake. Then I glance at the mirror in my room. It's an ordinary full-length mirror, leaning against the wall. I notice right away that my reflection doesn't look right. The angles are slightly off. My shoulders look broader, and my head tilts in a strange way. I stand up and walk closer, my legs still shaking from the dream. I raise my arm. My reflection does the same, but the motion doesn't line up perfectly. It's delayed by a fraction of a second. My stomach twists in a knot. There's a slight warp in the glass, like it's bending at the edges. I reach out and press my hand against the mirror. It's solid and cool to the touch like a normal mirror. But I can't shake the thought of those reflections in the dream. I feel a tingling in my fingers. My breathing is shallow, and my heart won't slow down. I take a step back, trying to steady myself. My legs feel weak. I stare at the distorted reflection, and it almost seems like it's staring back at me with its own awareness. I don't know what to do about it. Part of me wants to ignore it, cover it up, or just move the mirror out of the room. But another part of me can't look away. I keep thinking of those other versions of me, pressing on the glass in that endless corridor. I'm not sure if they've found a way to follow me into my waking life. My entire body tingles with dread. I lick my lips and taste salt from my sweat. Right now, I'm just standing here, staring at my own reflection, wondering if it's going to move on its own. I can't see anything unusual in the mirror's background. It's just my room, the bed, the lamp. Everything is where it should be. But my reflection's posture is a little strange, like the shoulders are shifted or the spine is curved in a way I don't recognize. I feel my heartbeat in my throat. I want to look away, but I can't. My palms are still sweating. My breath is still shaky. I reach for the switch and turn on the bedroom light, hoping that the distortion is just a trick of the moonlight. It remains. The mirror is warped in a subtle way, but it's definitely there. I step back, uncertain, and sit on my bed. The mattress creaks. I rub my eyes, but I still see the distortion when I look again. The dream is too fresh in my head. My body feels exhausted, as though I really did run through that corridor. I'm not sure how to deal with it. For now, all I can do is stare and hope it doesn't get worse. I feel a dull ache in my stomach. I realize I've been holding my breath, so I force myself to exhale. My entire body trembles with leftover adrenaline. At this point, I'm convinced it's not just in my mind. The mirror is messed up. I can't tell how or why, but it's definitely different than it was before I went to sleep. My reflection's eyes look darker, the way they did in my dream. I stay there completely silent, just watching. The distortion doesn't disappear. I think about moving the mirror or covering it, but I'm too tired and too scared to get close again. So I just sit, waiting for my heart to settle, wondering if I'll see it blink when I'm not blinking. Now, every time I glance at the mirror, I feel the same sense of dread I felt in that corridor. It's like the dream never really ended. I don't know how to make it stop. I'm sweating again and my breathing is shallow. My mouth feels dry and my heart is still pumping too fast. I keep listening for any signs of movement. I keep looking for any shift in the reflection. Everything is too quiet. I can't shake the thought that the dream followed me here. I end up lying back on my bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, occasionally darting back to the mirror. My body stays tense for a long time. Eventually, my eyelids get heavy, but I keep forcing them open, terrified of falling asleep. I'm not sure what will happen if I dream about that corridor again. I'm not sure what happens if my reflections decide they want to come out. So I stay awake, staring at that slightly distorted image in the mirror, with a sick feeling in my stomach and a cold sweat on my skin, trying not to drift off. That's where I am now, caught between the dream world and reality, not knowing which side of the glass is really home. I saw that patch of forest on a Friday afternoon when I was looking for a quiet place to set up camp. I'd been searching for somewhere isolated to clear my head. I remember stopping at the edge of a thick line of trees, feeling a strong urge to see what was inside. The branches looked twisted and packed so close together that I couldn't see more than a few feet in. I stepped forward because I wanted solitude, and that place felt untouched. far from any trail or road. I parked my truck on a small gravel shoulder by the main road, pulled my backpack out and walked toward the tree line. The soil was soft under my boots. Each step sank into layers of dead leaves, old needles, and damp ground. I heard rustling in the canopy above, like branches sliding against each other. At first I thought it was just wind, but there wasn't any breeze. The air felt stale and heavy. I paused for a moment, looking around for animals. I didn't see any squirrels or birds. Usually in a forest you'll hear birdsong or some other sign of wildlife. There was nothing but that slow scraping sound in the canopy. I pushed through some low-hanging branches and found a rough path. It wasn't marked, but it was clear that something or someone had walked this route before. Broken twigs and disturbed leaves led me deeper. I moved slowly, making sure I didn't lose the direction I came from. I tied a bright bandana to a low branch near the entrance as a marker, so I could find my way back out. After about 15 minutes of walking, I noticed the sunlight was fading, even though it was still early afternoon. The canopy overhead was so dense that only thin beams of light made it through. The air felt cooler with each step and my skin prickled. My eyes kept adjusting to the dimness. At times I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, like shapes shifting near the trees. I told myself it was just the branches, but I still felt uneasy. I kept going because the ground seemed a little flatter in the distance, and I wanted a good spot to pitch my tent. I finally reached a small clearing, just big enough for a single-person tent. It was surrounded by tall, thick trees that shot straight up, their bark covered in dark moss. The clearing had short, patchy grass. I decided that was where I'd stay. There was no sign of fire pits or trash, so it seemed nobody had camped there in a while. I took off my pack and set it down. My shirt was damp with sweat, and I realized how humid it was inside that forest. The place felt sealed off from the outside world. I took a moment to catch my breath. My pulse was strong in my ears, and a tingling sensation ran through my arms. I tried to shake it off and got to work. I spread out my ground sheet, set up my small tent, and started gathering a few rocks to form a basic ring for a campfire. I was used to making a fire for warmth and light, but something about the darkness around me made me question whether a fire would help or just cast strange shadows. While I was setting the rocks in place, I heard a soft whisper. It sounded like a voice. At first, I thought it came from behind me, so I turned around fast. I didn't see anyone. The whisper came again, this time from the left. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded like a language I'd never heard. It had this odd rhythmic tone that made my scalp tighten. I glanced at the trees, but nothing moved. I stood still, listening, trying to figure out if maybe the wind was carrying someone's voice from far away. But the sound felt closer, like it was right among the trunks, gliding between them. I walked around the edge of the clearing, peering into the undergrowth. I half expected to see a hiker or someone messing with me, but there was no one. The whisper stopped. The forest was silent. I stood there with my breath stuck in my throat, waiting for another sound. My heart was thumping, but after a few seconds, everything stayed quiet. I decided to go back to my campsite and finish setting up. I unrolled my sleeping bag inside my tent and placed my flashlight, pocket knife, and water bottle next to me for easy access. I sat there for a moment, taking slow breaths and trying to calm down. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was just nerves. Sometimes new places make me jumpy. After about 10 minutes, I stepped back outside. The light was still dim, but I could tell evening was coming. I wanted to collect some firewood before it got too dark, so I headed toward a fallen log I'd passed earlier. As I walked, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I paused and turned around. I thought I saw a figure slip behind a tree. It looked vaguely human, but it moved too smoothly. I called out, "Hello?" No response. I approached the spot where I'd seen it. The tree trunk was thick, and there was a patch of tall ferns behind it. I pushed the ferns aside. No one was there. The ground was damp and covered in twigs, but I saw no footprints or disturbed leaves. I stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, feeling a surge of adrenaline. My throat felt tight and my breathing quickened. I grabbed a few branches from the fallen log, broke them into manageable pieces, and hurried back to camp. I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt watched, and every step back to my tent felt too long. Once there, I started building a small fire. The spark from my lighter took on the first try, and soon I had a weak flame. I added more twigs until the fire grew. The light flickered on the surrounding trees, making them look taller. Their shadows stretched across the ground, bending and swaying. I remember feeling a knot in my stomach as I watched those shadows. It was like they were moving on their own, independent of the fire's flicker. By the time the sun went down completely, the place was dark. My fire gave off a faint circle of light, and beyond that circle, everything looked black. I heard rustling in the leaves again, but it came from multiple directions. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes far. My breath was shallow. My hands trembled. I felt sweat trickling down the sides of my face, even though the temperature had dropped. I kept my flashlight pointed at the tree line, trying to catch movement. Around 8 or 9 at night, though I can't be certain of the time, I heard the whispers again. This time they were clearer, like several voices speaking at once. They spoke in that same unfamiliar language. The words or sounds had a harsh edge, but they also felt like they were forming a chant. My entire body felt tense. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak, but my voice came out in a low croak. I managed a weak, "Who's out there?" The whispers paused, but no one answered. A few minutes later, I noticed a shape beyond the light of my fire. It looked like a person with elongated limbs, but I couldn't see the face. It stood there for a couple of seconds, then vanished behind a cluster of trees. I shot to my feet and gripped my flashlight and knife. My mind raced. I wondered if it was some hermit or someone living in the woods. Part of me wanted to call out again, but I was too scared. I decided to stay by the fire for a while longer. I kept adding wood to keep it alive, hoping the light would discourage whoever or whatever was out there. My heart pounded so hard that my chest felt tight. My stomach churned and I could taste acid in the back of my throat. My mind was stuck on that figure. It moved without sound, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. At some point I heard a low moan echo through the trees. It sounded like the wind, but it had a human quality to it. It rose and fell, then faded. My brain went into overdrive. I imagined all sorts of reasons why someone would wander this deep into the woods at night. But that didn't calm me. My muscles twitched with every noise. My back and shoulders ached from staying so tense. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to do a quick perimeter check. I walked a few steps from the fire, shining the beam around. The undergrowth looked still, but the light revealed worn patches in the ground as if something had been moving through there repeatedly. I saw bent ferns and snapped branches. I moved the flashlight a bit further and caught a glimpse of what looked like footprints. They weren't large, but they were shaped differently from a normal foot, almost narrow with a long stride. My heart hammered as I realized these prints led off into the deeper section of the forest. I returned to my campfire and stood there staring at the darkness. Then I saw that figure again, farther to the right. It stepped out from behind a thick trunk and raised an arm, like it was beckoning me to follow. My blood felt cold. My legs felt weak, but I still took a step closer, compelled by curiosity and fear. The figure shifted back into the shadows. I couldn't see the face, only a vague outline. I heard a soft clicking or clacking sound, like stones tapping together. I moved my flashlight in that direction, but the beam caught only the bark of trees and dense leaves. I had no interest in following that thing into the darkness, but I also felt trapped if I stayed. My mind raced with the idea of packing up and getting out, but hiking out of that forest at night with whatever was lurking didn't seem safe. I decided to wait until first light. I put out my fire to avoid drawing more attention and retreated inside my tent. I kept the zipper partially open so I could peek out if I heard anything. My flashlight was clenched in my hand and my knife rested on my thigh. Inside the tent, I lay on my sleeping bag, muscles wound tight. My skin felt clammy. My heartbeat pounded against my eardrums. Every few minutes I heard those whispers or that clicking noise. Sometimes it sounded close, sometimes distant. Time stretched. My phone showed that only an hour passed, but it felt like several. I tried to slow my breathing, counting each inhale and exhale. I was desperate to keep calm because I knew panic wouldn't help me. At one point, the whispers were right outside my tent. They formed a single voice, chanting. The words were sharp and guttural, and they seemed to vibrate in my skull. My vision swam for a moment, and I felt pressure in my head like a tension headache. My mouth went completely dry. I switched on my flashlight and pointed it at the tent walls. The chanting stopped abruptly, and I heard quick steps moving away. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat there in the dark, listening. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut down. Every small noise made me jerk. My knees felt stiff. My neck was sore. My back was damp with sweat, and the sleeping bag clung to me. Sometime after midnight, I caught a glimpse of a shadow passing near the front of my tent. I froze, holding my breath. The shadow lingered, and I heard that low clicking noise again, almost like it was trying to communicate. Then it slid away and everything went quiet. When the first bit of morning light finally crept into the sky, I zipped open my tent, packed up my gear in a hurry, and stepped out. My legs felt shaky. I stuffed everything into my backpack with clumsy hands. I didn't bother with breakfast. I just wanted to leave. The forest looked less menacing in the early light, but it still felt oppressive. The silence remained, and I still sensed that I wasn't alone. My ears rang slightly from the tension. I found my makeshift trail marker and followed it back, moving as fast as I could without running. Twigs snapped under my boots and branches snagged at my clothes as if they didn't want me to go. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that figure behind me. I thought I heard the whispers once or twice, but they were faint. My heart pounded. My shoulders ached from the weight of my pack. My muscles begged for rest, but I refused to slow down. When I reached the edge of the forest and saw my truck, I let out a long breath. My hands were trembling so much that I dropped my keys trying to unlock the door. I finally got the truck open, threw my pack inside, and started the engine. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. As I drove off, I looked in the rearview mirror. The forest entrance seemed dark, like it was swallowing the morning light. I felt a surge of relief as the distance grew between me and those trees. I didn't hear the whispers after that, but I kept replaying the sounds in my head on the drive home. I felt lightheaded and stayed hyper-aware of every passing shape on the highway. I knew I had experienced something I couldn't explain. The memory of that chanting and those silhouettes stuck with me. I haven't gone back to that forest since, and I don't think I ever will. I still like to camp, but now I choose well-known areas where other people go. I want to feel the presence of familiar voices and campfires instead of that silent, dense growth and the strange murmurs that haunt my thoughts when I'm alone. I realized something was off when I saw that old foggy landscape photo sitting on my kitchen counter early one morning. I had left it inside my album the night before. The photo always stayed in the second slot of the third page. I never kept it loose. I liked that particular shot because it was simple. It showed a line of thin trees on a hill, a heavy mist in the background, and a faint outline of a wooden fence. It was nothing special, but it had a quiet appeal that I found calming. Seeing it out of place made me pause. I remember standing by the counter, rubbing my eyes, trying to recall if I had moved it myself. I felt a little uneasy, but I figured I might have misplaced it after flipping through the album late at night. I put it back and forgot about it for the rest of the day. That was the start. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes in my daily routine that led me to that photo again. I found it once under my pillow when I was about to go to bed. I stood there, sheets in my hands, staring at it. My heart felt tight. I checked the album in my desk drawer. Sure enough, the photo slot was empty. The strange part was that I didn't remember opening the album that day. I didn't remember touching the photo at all. I felt a wave of confusion. I shrugged, placed the photo back into the album, and went to sleep. A few days later, I discovered it pinned to my living room window with a small piece of tape. I came home from work in the late afternoon, dropped my keys on the coffee table, and saw it. The photo faced outward, as if someone wanted it to be seen from outside. I remember feeling a chill at the back of my neck. I looked around my apartment. Nothing else was out of place. I had this thought that maybe I was sleepwalking. I felt silly standing there, but I had no other explanation. I peeled the tape off and returned the photo to my desk. That night, I didn't sleep well. I woke up several times sweating and uneasy. I had dreams about being in a field that matched the scene in that photo, except everything felt cold and the air was damp. I could hear something behind me. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. When I looked over my shoulder, there was only gray fog. I woke up gasping. My chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. I turned on the bedside lamp and drank some water. I tried to calm down. I told myself it was just a dream. In the morning, I decided to examine the photo more carefully. I placed it on my desk under a bright lamp. I looked at every corner of the paper. There was no writing or mark on the back. The front was the same image I remembered, but I noticed something small. One of the trees appeared slightly crooked, as if it had moved a few inches to the left. The shape of the fence looked different too. One section had a broken board that I didn't remember seeing before. My stomach tensed up. I felt a wave of dread pass over me. I rubbed my temples and stood up, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I went to work and tried to forget it. I'm a regular office worker. I sit at a desk, answer emails, and talk to coworkers about client updates. My mind wasn't on the job. I found myself checking my phone whenever I had a spare moment, half expecting a notification or message about the photo, even though that made no sense. By late afternoon, I felt a pounding headache. I left the office and picked up some takeout on the way home. I wasn't in the mood to cook. When I got back to my place, I found the photo again, on the coffee table. I had left it in the album that morning. I was sure of it. I put it behind the other pictures on purpose. My hands felt clammy. My breath went shallow for a moment. I placed my food on the kitchen counter and approached the table slowly. I looked around the apartment. I checked the locks on the front door and windows. Everything was secure. I felt a prickling sensation on my arms, and my chest felt heavier than usual. I stared at the photo. The mist looked thicker this time. The tree line appeared shifted, as if the middle tree had moved closer to the right. The fence looked cracked. There was a shadow that seemed to stretch across the ground, forming a slight outline of something I couldn't identify. It gave me a jolt of panic. I turned the photo face down on the table. I left it there and went to eat my dinner, though I wasn't hungry anymore. That night I tried to watch TV to clear my head, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to the coffee table. The photo was face down, but I kept imagining it flipping over on its own. My heart beat hard in my chest. I tried to distract myself with some random show about travel destinations, but it didn't help. I ended up turning the TV off and going to my room. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Around midnight, I dozed off. I had another dream. I saw myself standing in the same foggy field from the photo. The trees loomed in the distance, and the fence was broken in several places. The ground felt cold under my feet. I could hear a faint rustling to my left. I kept turning my head, trying to see what was there. A shape flickered in the mist. It felt large, but I couldn't get a clear look. I started walking faster. The fog pressed around me. My throat felt tight. I tried to call out, but no sound came out of my mouth. I jolted awake, heart pounding. My body was tense. My shirt was damp with sweat. I got up and walked into the living room, half expecting to see the photo floating in the air or something impossible. It was still on the coffee table, face down. I picked it up with shaky hands. I felt a slight vibration in my fingers. My arms tensed. My breath caught in my throat. I brought the photo closer to my face. I could have sworn the surface of the photo pulsed once like a quick heartbeat. I nearly dropped it. My skin tingled from my fingertips all the way to my shoulders. I went straight to my desk drawer and shoved it inside, then slammed it shut. I felt a strong urge to leave my apartment. I threw on a jacket and walked out into the hallway. It was around 2 a.m., and everything felt quiet. The lights in the corridor buzzed faintly. I just stood there, trying to decide what to do. My mind was on that photo. I kept visualizing the broken fence and those shifting trees. The image made my stomach churn. After pacing the hallway for a while, I went back in. My fatigue caught up with me. I dropped onto the couch and slept there with the lights on. I didn't wake up until mid-morning. My back was stiff and my neck hurt. I sat up slowly, rubbed my face, and tried to remember what day it was. It was Saturday. I had no work. I felt relief. I decided I would figure this out once and for all. I grabbed the photo from the drawer and placed it in an old shoebox. Then I sealed the shoebox with tape. My hands felt shaky. I stuffed it into a closet in the spare room. I made sure to shove it behind some blankets and old magazines. My plan was simple: keep it locked away. I didn't want to destroy it outright. I wasn't sure why. I guess I was just worried about making things worse. I tried to push that thought out of my mind. I shut the closet door and went about my day. For a few hours, nothing happened. I did laundry, made a basic breakfast, and tried to watch a movie. My nerves started to settle. I thought maybe it was over. But around early evening, I felt uneasy again. My arms had goosebumps and my forehead felt clammy. I checked the spare room. The closet door was still closed. I opened it. The shoebox was in the same place, but the tape on the lid was loose. I felt a pulse in my temples. I pulled the box out, opened it, and saw the photo was gone. I dropped the box and stepped back, my heart thumping. My legs felt weak. I backed out of the room, looking around for any sign of it. I checked the hallway. I checked my bedroom. I checked the bathroom. I even looked under the bed in case it somehow slipped out. It was nowhere. My thoughts were racing. I sat on the couch, breathing hard. I stared at the wall, unsure of what to do next. My phone was nearby, but I didn't know who to call or what to say. After a few minutes, I stood up to get a glass of water. My throat was dry. When I entered the kitchen, I saw it again. The photo was stuck to the fridge door with a magnet. My pulse pounded in my head. I approached it slowly, my palms cold. The image was different now. The fence looked almost completely broken. The shadows among the trees looked bigger. They had rough outlines that resembled a group of figures. I felt tension in my shoulders. My breathing sped up. I reached out and touched the photo. The surface felt warm, and I thought I felt a slight throb like a slow beat. I pulled my hand away. A moment later, the warmth vanished. It went back to normal temperature. I took the photo and stuffed it into my jacket pocket. I walked out of the apartment, got in my car, and drove. I didn't have a clear plan. I just wanted to get away from the apartment. The roads were pretty empty that night. The sky was overcast and the streetlights were dull. I ended up driving to a parking lot behind a row of stores. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I turned off the engine and stared at the glove compartment. I didn't want to look at the photo again, but I felt drawn to it. I pulled it out of my pocket. The scene looked the same as in the kitchen. The shadow shapes were there, near the tree line. My chest felt tight. I took a few quick breaths. My mind was spinning with questions. I decided I couldn't keep it anymore. I reached into the back seat for a small metal container I sometimes used for tools. I shoved the photo inside and locked it. Then I put the container in the trunk of the car. I stayed in that parking lot for about an hour, not sure what to do next. I tried to calm down. I sipped from a bottle of water and stared out the window. Eventually, I drove to a nearby park. It was almost empty. A few people jogged by, but I kept to myself. I sat on a bench, flipping through my phone aimlessly. I felt uneasy, as if something was still right behind me. My shoulders were sore. My mouth felt dry. I kept hearing rustling leaves, but I saw no wind. When I got home later, I noticed the living room felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat. It read the normal temperature, but the air felt icy against my skin. I spent that night in a constant state of alert. I wanted to sleep, but I was too wound up. Around 3 a.m., I saw a flicker of movement in the hallway. I jumped up, my pulse pounded in my ears. I switched on the lights. The hallway was empty. I checked the kitchen, the spare room, the bathroom, nothing. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. Over the next few days, the photo didn't return to the apartment. I started to relax. I didn't have those vivid dreams for a while. I still felt anxious, but the tension was lessening. I told myself it was over. I told myself the photo was locked in the trunk of my car, trapped in that container. I left it there. I drove around with it sometimes, but I tried to forget about it. One afternoon, I parked in the driveway of my building and popped the trunk. I planned to check on the container. My heart rate sped up as I lifted the trunk lid. The container was there. I opened it carefully. The photo was gone. I felt a jolt like a punch to the gut. I slammed the trunk shut and backed away from the car, looking around the street. Nobody was nearby. My legs shook as I walked toward my apartment. I fumbled with the keys at the door, heart racing, breath uneven. I opened the door and stepped inside. It felt silent and empty. I switched on the lights. I noticed the album on my desk was slightly open. I approached it. My feet felt like they were dragging. I flipped the album pages. The spot where that foggy landscape photo belonged was filled again. The photo was back in its place. The broken fence looked even more damaged, and the shadows by the trees were so thick that I couldn't separate them from one another. They seemed like a crowd. My entire body tensed. I pressed my hand against my forehead. I took a shaky breath. I stood there in my living room, album in hand, feeling a steady pulse from the photo. My heartbeat felt synced with it. My neck muscles were tight. My back ached from the stress. I had no idea what to do anymore. I stared at the shifting details, the destroyed fence, the moving shapes in the trees, the thick mist that seemed to spread wider each time I looked at it. I felt trapped. I felt stuck in a house that didn't feel safe anymore, holding a photo that seemed impossible to escape. I couldn't see a way out. I just kept standing there, breathing hard, waiting for something to change. I still remember the moment I stepped inside that abandoned railroad tunnel with my camera in hand and my flashlight flickering. I wasn't expecting anything beyond some eerie silence and old rusted structures. That thought vanished the instant I heard that other breathing echoing in the dark. I found the tunnel through a local historical website. It mentioned how trains used to pass there decades ago, but the line got shut down. Some people talked about it in online forums, saying there were interesting arches and supports left behind. I wanted pictures of those structures for a side project I was working on. I went alone because my friends all had other plans that weekend. I packed a small backpack with water, an extra flashlight, and my camera gear. I reached the site around sunset. The entrance looked bigger than I expected. The tracks were gone, leaving only a rocky, uneven floor that sloped downward. The concrete around the edges was chipped. Thick weeds and small bushes grew at the tunnel mouth. When I aimed my flashlight inside, I saw only darkness. The beam revealed old graffiti on the walls and dripping water from overhead cracks. I heard a few drips echoing against the concrete. I stepped inside, taking slow, careful steps. The air felt colder than outside. I began walking deeper, shining my flashlight on the walls. I noticed several old markings, probably old tags from vandals. The deeper I went, the less graffiti I saw. The smell inside was musty, like damp rock and mold. My footsteps sounded loud in that tight space. My own breathing felt loud too, but it was controlled. I took some test shots with my camera, but the flash felt too bright in that darkness. So I adjusted the settings and tried a longer exposure with a tripod. The tunnel floor was uneven, so I had to prop the tripod legs carefully. While I was setting up the camera, I paused for a second because I thought I heard something behind me. It sounded like breathing, but I assumed it was just my own echo. I tried to match the pattern with my own inhale and exhale. It didn't match. My breathing was a bit fast from the mild excitement of exploring, but the sound I heard was slow and steady. I told myself it must be a trick of the acoustics. I kept working and ignored it. When I finished that shot and looked at the preview on my camera, I felt a chill run across my neck. I heard the breathing again. It was steady and calm, like someone carefully inhaling and exhaling. I switched off my flashlight for a moment to see if I could see any movement at the far end, hoping I might see a faint silhouette against the gloom. I saw nothing. The darkness felt complete. No light leaked in from outside anymore because I had walked far enough that the entrance was just a distant outline. I stood there for a moment, holding my breath to listen. My pulse thumped in my ears. I heard a drip in the distance. I heard the sound of something shifting on the ground like a light scuff. It didn't come from me. I flicked my flashlight back on and aimed it around in a circle. I didn't see anyone. The walls were rough, with cracks and wet patches. I saw an old maintenance door on one side, rusted and partially collapsed. The floor was strewn with pebbles and some old beer cans. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it could be an animal or just water echoing. Still, I felt uneasy. I moved on, shining my flashlight back and forth at a slow pace. Sometimes I stopped to snap photos of old support beams overhead. I heard steady dripping that came from spots where water leaked through the ceiling. The further I walked, the more the air seemed to cool. My breath formed faint puffs in front of my face. The tunnel walls got wetter. The flashlight revealed long streaks of moisture. At one point, I saw strange streaks that looked like they'd been smeared. I stepped closer and saw they were handprints. They looked fresh, with water droplets still forming around the outlines of fingers and palms. I felt my heartbeat pick up as I stared at those marks. They didn't look like any random stains. They were clearly shaped like hands pressed against the wall. The water dribbled along the edges of each handprint. I touched one of the prints lightly, feeling a slimy, cold surface. My fingertips came away damp. I wiped them on my pants and shone my flashlight around, trying to see if there were any footprints on the ground. I only saw my own footprints in the dust and the scattered rocks. At that moment, I heard the breathing again, closer this time. I froze and turned. My flashlight illuminated an empty corridor with the same damp walls and uneven floor. My hand shook a little as I moved the beam around. I half expected to see a figure standing there, but I didn't see anything. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I reminded myself I was in a dark space. My mind might be playing tricks. Still, the feeling that someone was there wouldn't go away. I decided to keep moving forward, figuring I would reach the far end soon. The tunnel was supposed to be about half a mile long. I kept a steady pace, trying to ignore the occasional soft scuff or echo behind me. Each step I took felt too loud. My backpack felt heavier than usual and the strap dug into my shoulder. The cool air made my face numb. I began to notice a draft coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, like a faint breeze pushing out from the far end. I stopped at one point to drink some water. My hand was trembling a bit as I raised the bottle to my mouth. I took a few gulps and listened. That rhythmic breathing sound started up again, and it seemed to come from behind me. I spun around, flashlight raised. Nothing was there. My heart pounded. I told myself to keep moving. A few minutes later, I felt something tap my shoulder. It was a light touch, like a finger poking me. I flinched hard, almost dropping my flashlight. I turned around so fast that I almost lost my balance. I shone the light around. I saw only the wall behind me, with water dripping down its surface. My shoulder tingled where I felt the touch. My first thought was that water might have dripped onto me from the ceiling, but the ceiling above me wasn't leaking at that moment. I felt my pulse racing and sweat formed on my forehead despite the cold air. My flashlight flickered a bit, making a faint buzzing sound. I tapped it with my hand and it stayed on. I forced myself to keep walking, but I moved faster. My footsteps echoed in rapid succession. I turned my flashlight toward the floor and saw old railroad ties here and there. Some were splintered and rotting. I tried not to trip on them. As I neared the far end, I noticed a dim glow ahead. It wasn't daylight because it was already dark outside. It looked like a faint shimmer, but I couldn't identify the source. After a short distance, I reached a wide section. It looked like an old area where workers stored equipment or maybe loaded cargo. The tracks would have gone straight through, but the space opened a bit to each side. The air felt colder in that spot. My flashlight beam slid across something on the left side that looked like a table or a makeshift platform. When I moved closer, I saw small candles, all melted down, arranged in a circle. They were burnt out, but I recognized the dark wax and leftover wicks. The surface beneath them was some kind of old metal sheet placed on top of broken cinder blocks. There were symbols scratched into the metal. I couldn't make them out. They were messy, like someone carved them by hand. Next to the candles, I saw what looked like a pile of small bones. They didn't look human. They might have been from a small animal, maybe a bird. They were placed in a little cluster. The setup looked like an altar. It had an unsettling vibe, especially in that cold, dark environment. I stepped back, feeling my palms sweat. That strange wind started blowing from within the tunnel, causing the hair on my arms to stand up. It was gentle, but cold enough to make me shudder. It carried a damp smell, like old soil. It slipped through my jacket, making me realize just how vulnerable I felt in that place. My breathing was ragged. I tried to steady myself. I aimed my flashlight around, checking all sides. I noticed a few more wet handprints on the walls near that makeshift altar, as though someone had pressed their palms there. I leaned in to look at one. Water trickled down from it, leaving a trail on the concrete. I heard a scrape behind me, like something sliding across the ground. I spun around, and my flashlight caught a glimpse of movement near the altar. It could have been my imagination, but I swore I saw a shape pull back behind a support column. My heart thumped as I stepped closer, shining my light. Nobody stood there when I reached the column. My ears felt plugged from my own pulse. My mouth was dry. I thought about turning back, but I also felt compelled to see if there was another exit, or if I could find a vantage point for more photos. I reasoned with myself, saying I came all this way to get unique pictures. I also wanted proof of that creepy altar. Part of me thought no one would believe me otherwise. I took a few quick photos with my camera, relying on the flash. The bright burst illuminated the area for a split second, revealing the cracked walls and the metal sheet with the melted candles. I heard that breathing again, this time from my right side. I whipped around, snapping another flash photo out of fear. The flash only lit empty space and wet walls. My hands were shaking. I kept walking toward what I hoped was the exit. The tunnel curved slightly, blocking any view of the outside. As I moved along, that breeze got stronger. It blew against my face and rustled the old debris on the floor. Loose pebbles shifted, and scraps of paper skittered across the ground. I shone my flashlight down the tunnel, trying to spot an opening. I couldn't see daylight or the outside. Maybe the exit was sealed off, or maybe I just needed to go a bit farther. I stopped near a jagged hole in the wall that looked like it led into a small side passage. There was metal rebar sticking out. Water dripped down the sides, forming a puddle at the base. I considered checking inside, but it felt wrong. Something about the darkness in that small passage made me uneasy. I decided against going in there. I heard another soft, scraping sound behind me. I pivoted, keeping the flashlight up, half expecting to see a figure. Nothing. My breath came in short gasps as I continued onward. I felt a strong desire to get out of that tunnel as fast as I could. My skin felt clammy, and my boots left scuff marks on the floor. Every small noise in that place made me flinch. My shoulders were tight, and my neck muscles started to ache from tension. I thought about the possibility of someone else being in there, maybe hiding. The idea gave me a chill. I just wanted to find the exit and go home. Eventually, the passage straightened out and I saw a faint glow. I realized it was moonlight, seeping in from the far entrance. The relief that washed over me felt almost overwhelming. I speed-walked toward it, nearly stumbling on loose rocks. As I got closer, I turned around one more time to check behind me. I shone my flashlight across the empty corridor. I saw wet footprints on the ground, but I hadn't noticed them before. They were not the shape of my boots. They appeared narrower, like bare feet. I counted at least 4 distinct prints heading in my direction. I couldn't tell if they came from deeper in the tunnel or from where I stood. My heart hammered in my chest. Then I felt that same tap on my shoulder again, a light pressure on my jacket. I spun around so quickly I almost lost my balance. I shone the flashlight wildly. I yelled out, "Who's there?" My voice echoed a dozen times, bouncing off the walls. I heard no reply, just a dripping sound in the distance. My head pounded. I backed up toward the exit, not turning my back on the darkness. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Once I was within a few steps of the exit, the breeze turned into a colder gust. It pushed me forward. I turned the flashlight off and let my eyes adjust to the faint moonlight. I could see the outline of bushes and broken concrete outside. I stepped out, feeling the night air on my face. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm the shaking in my legs. I looked back into the tunnel. It was just a black opening, silent and still. But I knew something was in there. I thought about the wet handprints, the altar, those bones, and that breathing. I stood there for a minute or two, gathering my thoughts. The quiet of the outdoors almost felt unreal after the constant echoes inside. I looked at my camera and saw the pictures I took. Some were blurry, others showed partial glimpses of the walls and that improvised altar. I didn't see any figure in the photos, just empty corners and random shapes that might have been lumps of debris. Without saying another word, I started walking back to my car. My hands still shook, and I checked over my shoulder every few seconds. When I got to my car, I climbed in, locked the doors, and just sat there breathing heavily. My chest felt tight. My hair was damp from sweat. I turned on the engine and drove away, feeling a heavy weight in my stomach. I kept looking at the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone behind me. I saw nothing but an empty road. I never found an explanation for that breathing or the handprints. I still have the photographs stored on my computer. They mostly show dark walls, drips of water, and that strange altar setup with melted candles. Every time I look at them, I feel that same cold tension creeping up my spine. I don't plan on going back there anytime soon. If someone asks me about the scariest place I've ever visited, that abandoned railroad tunnel is the first thing that comes to mind. And every time I remember the sensation of that invisible hand on my shoulder, my skin crawls all over again. I never expected to feel unsafe in my own apartment. I chose the place because it was on the 10th floor, high enough to keep away most intruders. The view was incredible, and I liked leaving my curtains open at night to watch the city lights. Then I started seeing that shape outside my window. At first I thought I was imagining it, just a play of shadows. But I was wrong. Something out there isn't just a trick of the light. It's real, and it wants to get inside. I moved in about 6 months ago. It's a tall building in the middle of a busy neighborhood. The streets below are never quiet, but I'm used to noise. I grew up in a city, so sirens and car horns help me sleep. My apartment has 1 bedroom, a small living room, a cramped kitchen, and a narrow balcony. The balcony door is a sliding glass door, and right next to it is a large window. I don't like heavy curtains, so I bought thin ones that barely block the light. At night, the lights from outside shine in, painting small shapes on my walls. It comforts me for some reason. A few weeks ago, I was making myself a late dinner. I'd just gotten off work and was still wearing the same button-down shirt and slacks I wore at the office. I remember feeling tired. I had the overhead light on in the kitchen, and the living room was dim. I set my plate on the coffee table and plopped down on the couch. That's when I noticed something move outside the window. It was just a flicker at the corner of my eye. I turned my head, scanning the darkness. My apartment building faces another tower across the street, but there's a stretch of open air between them, big enough that nobody could stand on a ledge or anything. I saw a slight movement, but I assumed it was a reflection of passing headlights. I shrugged it off and went back to my food. My living room was quiet except for the buzz of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside. Later that night, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I thought I heard a tap on the glass. It was faint, like a small pebble hitting a window. I walked out into the living room. The lights were still on and I could see the city out there, the buildings lit up, the cars moving along the roads. I didn't see any bird or anything that could have made that tapping sound. I decided it was probably just the wind or a shifting frame somewhere. I turned off the lights and went to bed. The next night, I was reading a document on my laptop, sitting on the couch. The curtains were open and the balcony door was locked. Around midnight, I noticed a shadow pass across the glass. It wasn't a quick blur. It was slow and deliberate. My heart kicked up a bit. I got up, walked over, and looked outside. There was nothing. The balcony was empty. The air was still. No wind moved the curtains. I just stood there for a while, staring into the darkness. I didn't see any cables or ropes that a window cleaner might have left. I tried to laugh it off. I told myself I was overworked and needed more sleep. A few nights later, I woke up around 2 in the morning because my throat felt dry. I got out of bed to get a glass of water. When I walked into the living room, I noticed a tall, dark outline against the window. My pulse spiked, and I froze. It looked like a figure, but I couldn't see any details. Then it moved. It slid to the left toward the balcony door, then paused. I dropped my glass on the carpet. I didn't hear a crash because it landed softly, but water splashed around my ankles. I wanted to rush forward and close the curtains, but something about the shape made me hesitate. It wasn't on the balcony. It looked like it was hovering outside, against the glass, in midair. My hands started shaking. I felt my stomach tighten and my breath caught in my throat. I stayed still, watching. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt like it was staring at me. The shape stayed there for a moment, then drifted off to the right and disappeared. I turned on every light I could find. I spent the rest of that night on the couch with the TV on volume low, trying to keep my eyes open. I dozed off around dawn, and when I woke up, the city was bright, and nothing looked out of place. Over the next week, I grew nervous whenever night fell. The first few nights, I tried to ignore the window. I focused on work emails, phone calls, anything to avoid looking at the glass. I told myself it was stress. I was hallucinating, but I knew I wasn't. My mind felt clear. I started closing the curtains, but they're so thin that you can still see the glow of the outside lights. I could swear I saw a silhouette through the fabric sometimes. One night, I heard that same gentle tapping. I stood there staring at the curtains. I didn't open them. I just whispered to myself, "Go away," and waited. The tapping stopped. Then it got worse. One night, I was half asleep on the couch. I hadn't bothered getting up to go to my bed. I had my phone in my hand, the TV was muted, and the lights were off. I heard a loud creak, like something pushing against the glass. I sat up, my heart pounding. I looked over. The curtains were parted just a little, enough for me to see the window. There was a hand pressed against it. It looked translucent, like skin made of fog. I could see the faint outline of fingers splayed out. My entire body tensed. My scalp tingled, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I wanted to yell, but I couldn't make a sound. The hand stayed there, pressed flat against the glass. Then it moved, sliding up, leaving a faint trace of some strange residue. I could see it glisten when the streetlights hit it. I bolted off the couch, flicked on the nearest lamp, and grabbed a heavy book from the shelf. My first impulse was to throw it or hit the glass, but I stopped myself. I was terrified of breaking the window and letting that thing inside. I just stood there, breathing hard, my feet unsteady. Eventually, the hand pulled away. I watched the shape melt back into the darkness. I waited, eyes locked on the window, for at least 10 minutes. Then I slowly went over to the glass. I tried to calm down, telling myself I had to check. I leaned in close. The window was slick with condensation, but there were streaks left by the fingers. They were long, almost too long, and the shape didn't look quite human. My mouth felt dry and my thoughts raced. I kept thinking, this is insane. But there it was. I spent the next day on edge. I kept replaying that moment in my head, picturing the hand pressed against the glass. I almost called the police, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. I considered calling building security, but there's no outside ledge for a person to stand on. Nobody could get up here without specialized equipment. And if it was some sort of break-in attempt, why would the intruder have a see-through hand? A couple of days passed without any new appearances. I tried to get my life back to normal. I went to work, grabbed takeout on my way home, watched TV, tried to sleep. But every time darkness fell, I felt uneasy. I left some lights on. I kept scanning the balcony door, waiting for a glimpse of movement. The city noise outside felt too distant. It was like the air in my apartment had changed, like I was never alone. I decided to buy a thicker curtain. I went to a home goods store and picked something heavy and dark. I installed a new rod and hung them up. I figured that if I couldn't see out, maybe it wouldn't bother me. That night, I closed them completely. I sat on my couch, laptop on my lap, trying to watch a video. Around midnight, I heard the sound of fabric scraping against glass. It was subtle, like someone brushing a sleeve against a window. My stomach churned. I stared at the curtains. They were still, but I could see tiny movements at the edges, like the fabric was being tugged from outside. My head started to pound. I got up, walked over, and placed my hand against the curtain. I felt a slight pushback, like there was something on the other side pressing forward. I yanked my hand away and stumbled back. My heart raced and my breathing got heavy. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't run. I was in my own home, and it was the middle of the night. I tried to ignore it. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and put on some music to block out any sounds. I didn't sleep much. I kept picturing that translucent hand pressing through the curtain, maybe finding a way inside. The next morning, I rushed out to work and tried to focus on spreadsheets and emails. It was hard. My mind kept wandering back to what I'd felt. There was force behind that push, like a person leaning their weight against the curtain, but it didn't feel solid. A friend invited me out for drinks after work, and I said yes. I didn't mention any of this to him. He just thought I was stressed and needed to unwind. We sat in a bar, and I had a couple of beers. I almost told him about the weird experiences, but I knew he'd think I was joking or losing it. So I kept it to myself. When I got home, it was late, and I was slightly buzzed. I hoped maybe alcohol would numb my nerves. I turned on all the lights, made sure the curtains were closed, and fell onto the couch. I woke up to a screeching noise. The clock on the wall said 3:17 a.m. The noise came from the window area like nails scratching glass. The hair on my arm stood up. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I turned on the lamp. The sound stopped. My mind spun with panic. I debated calling someone, but who would I call at this hour? I forced myself to stand. My legs felt weak. I crept to the window. The thick curtains were closed. I reached out, grabbed the edge of one, and pulled it aside a tiny bit, just enough to peek out. My breath caught in my throat. The shape was there, pressed so close to the glass that I could see a faint outline of a head and shoulders. The city lights behind it created a slight rim around the form, but everything else looked grayish and transparent. It seemed to shift in the air, as if floating. I let the curtain fall. My chest felt tight. I had no idea what it wanted or why it kept coming back. I stepped away, trying to control my breathing. My mouth felt dry and my fingers trembled. I decided I couldn't keep staying silent about this. I didn't want to move out of my own home, but I was scared to live like this. I needed to know if there was some explanation. Maybe a neighbor with a weird hobby, some kind of drone or a reflection. But deep down I knew that hand on the glass wasn't a drone. It wasn't a trick of light. I grabbed a flashlight from my kitchen drawer. I pulled the curtains back again, this time quickly, shining the beam onto the glass. The shape vanished. I swung the flashlight around, looking for any cables or equipment outside. There was nothing, just empty space and distant city windows. After a few seconds, I closed the curtains and shut off the flashlight, feeling more confused than ever. That morning I tried calling the building manager. I told him I heard strange noises at night, like someone was messing with my balcony. He said I was the third person to mention weird stuff in the last 2 weeks. He didn't have details, but he said others on high floors were complaining about flickering shadows. He shrugged it off, saying maintenance had checked for loose window parts. They found nothing. I decided to buy a small security camera. I placed it on a table facing the window. I set it to record overnight. The first night I left the curtains open, thinking maybe I'd catch whatever it was on video. I barely slept. I kept hearing faint taps on the glass. In the morning I checked the footage. I saw the reflection of my living room. Around 2 a.m., the camera flickered. The screen went static for a moment, then returned. I couldn't see anything outside, just darkness. It stayed that way until morning. No real evidence. I tried again for the next few nights, changing angles, adjusting lighting. The same thing happened. Every time I heard a noise or saw a movement, the camera went fuzzy. It felt like the thing outside knew I was trying to record it. It never appeared clearly. I started feeling trapped, like there was no way to prove what I was seeing. My anxiety got worse. I kept jumping at small sounds. 2 nights ago, I heard the glass crack. Not a big shatter, but a distinct snap. I rushed to the window. There was a thin fracture at the edge, near the frame. The shape was behind the glass, pushing against it. I saw the silhouette of that hand again. My heart pounded. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't press dial. I knew they'd get here too late. By the time they arrived, it would be gone. And then what would I say? I watched in horror as the fracture spread a little. Then the shape moved back. The pressure eased. The glass stopped cracking. I stepped closer. My arms shook. I could see the faint lines where it had started to split. I pressed my palm against it. The glass was cold. The shape hovered for a moment longer, then faded into the darkness. Now I'm sitting on my couch, the lights on, the curtains drawn. I haven't slept more than a few hours in days. I called a repair service to fix the crack tomorrow morning. I'm scared that if it keeps pushing, the glass will break, and I don't know what will happen if that thing ever gets inside. My stomach twists, just thinking about it. I can't believe I'm stuck living like this, but I have nowhere else to go. Maybe I'll try to stay at a friend's place for a few nights. But I'm worried about leaving my apartment empty. What if it comes inside when I'm gone? For now, I'm here, typing this out. I keep checking the window, even though the curtains are shut. I feel like it's out there, watching me, waiting for another chance. My pulse won't slow down. Every small creak in the walls makes me flinch. I just want to feel safe again, but I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that hand. I wonder if it's reaching right now, pressing against the glass, testing it. I wonder if the next time I look, I'll find the window wide open. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding against my ribs. The first time I saw that figure in my dreams, I wrote it off as a nightmare caused by stress. But when I kept seeing it every single night, I knew something was wrong. I wasn't just scared. I felt drained, like my body couldn't recover from a simple night of rest. That's how it started. I live alone in a small house outside the city. I don't have many visitors, and my routine is pretty normal. I work in a maintenance shop all day, come home, eat, and usually watch something mindless before bed. Nothing about my life felt unusual before that figure showed up. The first night, I remember standing in a dark corridor in my dream. The walls looked old and wet, like stone in a damp cellar. My breath came out in short bursts. I felt a chill on my skin, but I couldn't see much ahead. Then I noticed a shape moving at the end of the corridor. It wore a dark cloak with a hood pulled down low. It glided across the floor, not making a sound. No footsteps, no rustling of cloth. Just a slow, smooth motion. I tried to shout at it, but no words came out. My throat felt tight and cold. The figure reached out a hand toward me, fingers long and pale. Then I jerked awake, gasping. In the morning, I realized I'd only slept a few hours. My limbs felt stiff, my eyes burned. I dismissed it as a random nightmare, maybe from a documentary I'd watched, so I pushed through the day. The second night, the same dream came back. The corridor appeared again, damp walls and stale air pressing on me. That figure stood even closer to me this time. I saw its face in a brief flash, dark hollows where eyes should be, tight skin stretched across thin bones. It made a slow motion, like it was scooping something out of the air near my chest. I felt my heart hammering, and then I woke up coughing. My throat burned, and I had trouble breathing for a few seconds. I got out of bed and paced around my bedroom. My head throbbed, and I noticed a strange heaviness in my chest. It felt like I'd been holding my breath for too long. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection showed dark circles under my eyes. My hair was sweaty and plastered to my forehead. I tried to calm down, but my skin felt clammy and my hands shook. I decided I had to ignore it again. Maybe it was just stress. I crawled back into bed and managed a few more hours of restless sleep. By the end of that week, I knew it wasn't normal. The dream repeated every night, and the figure's presence felt stronger. Each time I woke up more tired than the day before. One morning, I almost fell asleep in the shower. Another day, I nodded off in my car during my lunch break. My coworkers noticed I wasn't myself. I looked pale and seemed distracted. I told them I was dealing with insomnia, which wasn't far from the truth, but I left out the details about the figure. I didn't want to sound crazy. No one likes to admit they're scared of something that only exists when you close your eyes. Then I started finding small pouches around my house. The first one appeared in the hallway, near the front door. It was made of coarse black fabric, tied with a thin cord. I picked it up and felt a cold sensation against my palm. It was like holding an icicle, but the pouch itself didn't look wet or frozen. When I loosened the cord, a blast of frigid air hit my face. It carried a faint whisper, like a single word spoken in a raspy voice. I couldn't make out the word, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I dropped the pouch on the floor, and it rolled under a chair. My heart pounded, and I tried to calm my breathing. I eventually picked it up with a towel and threw it in a box in the closet, not wanting to look at it. I told myself I'd figure it out later. The next day, I found another one on my kitchen counter. Same size, same fabric, same cold presence when I touched it. I felt my pulse spike, my cheeks got hot, and my stomach cramped up. It didn't make sense. I locked all my doors and windows at night. I didn't have any reason to suspect a prank. No one else had a key to my place. But these pouches kept showing up, like someone wanted me to see them. There were little differences each time. One had a faded symbol on the side that looked like 3 intersecting lines. Another had a darker stain near the bottom. Whenever I untied the cord, I felt that cold air rush out, and I heard that faint whisper. It never lasted long, just a second or two. Around the same time, my dreams got worse. The corridor expanded into a large chamber. The figure stood in the center, collecting small wisps of light from the air. My chest felt hollow every time I inhaled. Then I'd see my own reflection behind the figure. My eyes were dark, and my face looked drawn. The figure hovered closer and reached out with those thin fingers. I'd wake up every time covered in sweat, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. My sheets were soaked, and my head felt heavy, like I hadn't slept in days. My muscles ached and my thoughts felt slow. I needed answers. I started searching online for anything about mysterious figures in dreams, pouches that emit cold air, or anything that resembled what I was experiencing. Most results were about fictional stories or myths. I spent hours sifting through random websites reading about shadow people, dream demons, and ancient spirits. One night I stumbled on a reference to something called the Collector of Sighs. It was buried in a forum about folklore. Someone mentioned an old story where a dark figure fed on human despair. This figure apparently roamed between different worlds, slipping into people's dreams to harvest their fears and pains. The more a person worried or felt anxious, the easier it was for the collector to latch on. The post was short, and the comments didn't add much. But that name stuck with me, the collector of sighs. I tried to push it out of my mind, but over the next few days I noticed more similarities. The forum described small cloth pouches that this entity used to store the essence of hopelessness. The pouches were always cold to the touch, and opening them released trapped remnants of fear. My chest tightened when I read that. It felt too close to my experience to be random. After I finished reading, I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. My hands trembled as I shut my laptop. I struggled to catch my breath as if I'd run a mile. I tried to stop worrying about it, but each night the dream continued. I saw the figure gather something from the air, something that shimmered faintly. It would reach into that space where my chest was in the dream and pull out a thin vapor. I felt my lungs spasm and my throat burn. Then I'd wake up feeling exhausted. I started chugging energy drinks at work just to stay awake. I snapped at my boss once for asking if I was okay. My shoulders stayed tense all day and my back ached. More pouches appeared in my house, tucked under my bed near the bathroom sink, and even next to the couch in the living room. Each one gave me that same jolt of cold when I touched it, and they all made that quiet, whispered sound when I opened them. Sometimes it sounded like a wheeze. Other times it was a sharp gasp. It never lasted more than a second, but it made my heart race every time. I kept collecting them in a cardboard box in the corner of my closet, unsure of what else to do. One night, I fell asleep on the couch. I dreamed of a huge chamber again, the walls covered in dark stains. The figure stood there, but this time, it turned its head to look directly at me. I heard a low hiss and my vision blurred. My legs felt weak. I dropped to my knees in the dream. The figure stretched out a hand toward me, and I felt a pulling sensation in my chest as if something was tugging at my lungs. My eyes watered, and my arms shook. I managed to force myself awake by wrenching my body to the side. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor, my face pressed against the carpet. I gasped for air, sweat dripping down my temple. I decided to talk to someone, but I wasn't sure who would believe me. I don't have close friends in my area, and my family lives across the country. I didn't want to call a doctor and say, I have a dream demon draining my energy. They'd probably prescribe pills or send me to a therapist, so I researched on my own. I read anything I could find about ancient spirits, dream entities, and ways to break contact. Some articles suggested rituals, chanting, or prayers. Others recommended focusing on positive thoughts and ignoring the entity to starve it of fear. But my fear was real, and my exhaustion was even more tangible. I tried blocking my mind before sleep. I turned on loud music, watched mindless videos, and tried to distract myself with basic chores. But every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts drifted to that figure. I dreaded the moment I'd see it again. Even sitting at my desk at work, I'd get flashes of memory from the dream. My hands would shake, and I'd drop whatever I was holding. I felt an ache in my chest, like an emptiness right in the center of my ribcage. Then I noticed something else. The pouches weren't just appearing randomly. They seemed to show up after I had an especially anxious day. If I came home stressed about a problem, I'd find a new pouch on a table or a chair. It felt like the collector was feeding on my anxiety, collecting bits of my dread in these small sacks. Every time I opened one, I heard my own sharp intake of breath, like it captured my gasping from the dream. My nights got worse. I tried staying awake as long as possible, forcing myself to watch the same shows on repeat. My eyes burned, and my head felt foggy. Around 3 a.m. I'd pass out. I'd wake up hours later, either on the couch or slumped over at the kitchen table. I always woke up with that deep sense of fatigue, like I hadn't slept at all. My heart pounded every morning as I tried to steady myself. My mouth felt dry and my limbs felt heavy. I started talking to myself, trying to coach myself into some kind of defensive mindset. I'd say things like, "It's not real," or "This thing can't hurt me if I don't let it." But those words felt hollow. The next time I fell asleep, the corridor or the chamber would appear, and the figure would be waiting. Its presence felt more solid, like it had weight and substance. It would lift one of those pouches and empty a faint vapor into it, vapor that drifted right out of my chest. My own breath stuttered each time. I'd wake up gasping or choking. I finally tried throwing away the pouches. I gathered all of them from the closet box, put them in a trash bag, and drove to a dumpster far from my house. I tossed them inside, slammed the lid, and drove away quickly. I felt a slight surge of relief, like I'd done something proactive. That night I hoped I'd see nothing, but the dream returned, and in the morning I found 2 new pouches on my bedside table. I almost screamed out of frustration. I kicked the bed frame and paced around the room, breathing fast. My legs felt weak, my hands were cold, and I felt a slight tremor in my chest. I had to face the truth. My own dread was an open invitation. The more stressed I got, the stronger that presence became. Every anxious thought I had seemed to open a door for it. I realized that the name Collector of Sighs was literal. It thrived on my gasps, my fearful breathing, my sighs of despair. Each pouch was a container for those moments of panic. Once I understood that, I tried something different. I told myself that I wouldn't panic when I saw the figure in my dreams. I didn't bother with hopeful thoughts. I just tried to stay calm physically. It wasn't easy, but I forced myself to practice slow breathing during the day. I inhaled and exhaled in a measured way, focusing on keeping my body relaxed. At night, when I felt the dream set in, I tried to keep my mind clear. I forced my jaw to unclench and kept my hands loose at my sides. I still saw the corridor, the damp walls, and the figure. But every time I felt the cold hand reach out, I focused on slow, steady breaths. My heart pounded, but I resisted the urge to gasp. The figure moved closer, but I just stared at it without letting myself flinch. Over several nights, it seemed to make a difference. I still woke up tired, but not as drained as before. The pouches stopped multiplying. I only found 2 or 3 more, and then they seemed to vanish altogether. My body was still tense, but I felt a slight improvement each morning. The corridor in my dream stayed the same, but the figure no longer stood in the center. Sometimes I only saw it at the edges of my vision, floating in the corner. I still felt cold whenever it moved, but I kept my breath steady. My chest felt tight, but it didn't burn. I'm not free of it yet. I still sense that presence around me, especially at night. Sometimes I hear a faint whisper from the closet where I once stored those pouches. Occasionally I see a black shape at the edge of my peripheral vision when I'm brushing my teeth. My heart still races, but I try not to let it break into full panic. I haven't found a new pouch in a few days, which feels like progress. I don't claim to understand this thing fully, but I know it won't leave if I just give in to terror. My only option is to keep my composure. I won't pretend I'm calm about all of this. I get jumpy when the lights flicker. I keep a flashlight by my bed, and I've stopped sleeping with the door shut. But I'm still here, and I'm trying. I'm hoping that by not giving the Collector of Sighs what it wants, I can slowly push it back to wherever it came from. My body aches from lack of proper sleep. My vision gets blurry sometimes, and I still feel chills on my skin late at night. But I'm not giving up. I don't know if it'll stop appearing in my dreams completely, or if I'll have to live with this presence for the rest of my life. All I can do is control my own reactions and keep my breathing steady. That's where I stand right now, fighting to keep this thing from feeding on me any further. It's a battle I face every time I close my eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine the second I turned onto that deserted street. It was dark, and the few street lamps still working flickered weakly. My body felt heavy from a long day, and I wanted nothing more than to get home. I saw a 2-story house on the corner, its windows wide open, and I heard some old tune drifting out. The music was scratchy and distant. I didn't see any lights inside, but I felt pulled toward it. I decided to check it out, thinking maybe someone was there who could point me toward a faster route home. I knew it was a mistake as soon as I stepped onto the sagging porch. The stairs leading up to the front door had cracks running across the boards. My right foot went into a small hole when I tested the first step. Dust kicked into my face. I coughed and gripped the handrail, which felt loose under my fingers. I felt my pulse in my temples. The music kept playing, but it sounded warped, like an old record that was spinning too slowly. I couldn't see any lights through the open windows, just darkness inside. I reached for the door, which hung slightly ajar. Its paint was peeling, and there were chips of it scattered on the porch. I pushed it open. The hinges screeched in a high-pitched tone, like they hadn't been oiled for years. The moment I stepped through, a strong gust of air rushed past me, and the door slammed shut behind me with a loud bang. My heart lurched. I spun around and yanked the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I stood there in the dim entrance hall. The floor creaked under me, and then the wood sank a little. I jumped back as part of the board cracked. I didn't fall through, but my legs sank about halfway down. I pulled it free, breathing hard. The house smelled like stale air mixed with rotting wood. The old tune was louder inside. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It echoed in the corridors, almost like it came from every wall at once. I tried to calm down by taking slow breaths. I stepped carefully, testing each board to make sure it wouldn't break under my weight. I kept close to the wall, where the floor felt sturdier. My hands shook a bit, and I felt a bead of sweat roll down my temple. My shirt stuck to my back. I wanted to find a back door or a window I could crawl through. The windows near the entrance hall were boarded up from the inside. I had seen them open from outside, but inside, they looked sealed. I walked deeper into the house, following the faint glow of moonlight through cracks in the walls. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the space was larger than it appeared. Sometimes I heard what sounded like whispers just behind me. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing but the corridor stretching back into the darkness. I tried not to think about the fact that I might be stuck in here all night. The music got louder the farther I went. It had a scratchy, violin-like sound, accompanied by a low hum that reminded me of an old organ. The melody repeated in short loops. There was no change in tempo or rhythm. It was the same series of notes over and over. My nerves felt raw. I noticed my hands clenching and unclenching like my body was on high alert. I came upon a stairway in the hallway. The banister was missing in places and each step looked uneven. I stopped at the base of the stairs and listened. I heard voices, but they didn't sound like any normal conversation. It was more like chanting, but the words made no sense to me. It had a layered quality, as if several people were murmuring in unison. I couldn't make out any clear phrases. My scalp tingled and my breathing sped up. I decided to go up the stairs because something told me that's where the music was. I placed my foot on the first step. It groaned loudly. I took another step, holding the banister, which was rough and splintered. A few steps creaked louder than the others, sending vibrations through my feet. I tried to move carefully, but my legs felt shaky. My mouth was dry and I could taste dust on my tongue. When I reached the top, I found a long hallway with several closed doors. A single window at the far end let in a pale bit of moonlight. I heard the voices more clearly. They came from somewhere ahead, maybe behind one of the doors or further down the corridor. The music continued, that same loop, but now it sounded more distorted. I noticed my pulse pounding in my ears. I walked to the first door on my right and rested my hand on the doorknob. It felt cold. I turned it slowly and pushed the door open with my foot. The hinges squeaked, and the music got louder for a moment, then faded again. The room was dark, but I could see it was empty except for a few pieces of broken furniture. I stepped inside and aimed my flashlight, which I had pulled out of my backpack. The beam lit up dusty chairs and a small table with a missing leg. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. I heard the floorboards behind me in the hallway creak, like someone had stepped on them. I spun around, shining my flashlight, but the hallway was empty. My heart thudded against my ribs. I left the room and moved down the hallway. The second door was locked. The third door opened, revealing a smaller space that smelled like wet plaster. There was a single window on the far wall, cracked open about an inch. I tried to push it open wider, hoping to escape, but it was stuck. I put all my weight into it, but it barely moved. I heard the chanting again, much closer. It made my hair stand up. I gave up on the window and returned to the hallway. As I approached the end of the corridor, it seemed to stretch. One moment, I thought I was only a few feet from the last door. The next, I realized I was nowhere near it. I kept walking, but the door looked farther away. My flashlight flickered, and I tapped it. My stomach dropped when I felt the hallway floor shake. It was like the entire house shifted. The boards beneath me cracked louder with each step. My knees felt weak. I was afraid of breaking through the floor again. I finally reached the last door on the left. I pressed my ear to it, listening for the music. It seemed quieter here, but the voices were distinct. I heard them reciting something that sounded like random syllables. My face felt hot, and sweat dripped down my forehead. I opened the door and found a large, empty room. The floor was bare, with wide planks covered in dust and debris. There were tall windows on the opposite wall, all of them open. Moonlight poured in, lighting up the space. I walked inside, shining my flashlight around. My footsteps echoed, and I noticed a strange effect. When I stopped walking, the echo of my footsteps continued, as if several more sets of feet were following me. Each step repeated in a staggered pattern. I felt my chest tighten. I turned around quickly, shining the flashlight behind me. The room was completely empty, but I still heard that overlapping echo fading into silence. Suddenly, the chanting voices grew louder. They bounced off the walls, then died down. The house fell silent for a moment. I stood there, breathing fast, trying to calm myself. My flashlight beam picked up a door at the far end of the room, half hidden by a tattered curtain that was nailed to the wall. The music started again, but this time the notes sounded like they were coming from beneath the floor. I felt the vibrations under my shoes. I crossed the room, stepping over broken boards and piles of old wallpaper. The door behind the curtain was unlocked. I nudged it open with my shoulder and found another hallway, narrower than the one upstairs. The air felt damp, and I smelled a musty odor, like mold. The chanting voices pulsed in and out, growing distant, then close again. My legs felt tense, and I had to remind myself to breathe. I moved down the hallway, shining my light along the walls. The plaster had cracks all over, and in some places the wood beneath showed through. I passed a door on my right, tried the knob, and found it stuck. I yanked hard, and it sprang open. Inside, I saw a small storage room lined with shelves. Most of them were empty. I spotted a few glass jars with something dried inside them, maybe herbs or leaves. I didn't look too closely. The smell in there was stronger, and it made me gag. I closed the door and kept walking. The hallway ended at a stairwell going down. The steps looked more solid than the ones at the front of the house, but I could barely see beyond a few feet. The music was definitely coming from below. The chanting was louder as well. I considered turning around, but I remembered the front door was jammed. Maybe there was a back door downstairs. As I descended, I felt the temperature drop. My skin prickled and I shivered. My breathing echoed in the stairwell. I held onto the damp railing, keeping my flashlight pointed ahead. The steps led me to a lower floor I hadn't noticed from outside. It must have been some kind of basement level. The floor was made of stone. My shoes scraped against it, sending small echoes along the corridor. Down here, the walls were plain concrete, some sections covered in moss. Water dripped somewhere, creating a soft plop every few seconds. The chanting rose again, sounding as if it came from just around the corner. My stomach felt tight, and my shoulders ached from tension. I didn't want to walk around that corner, but I couldn't stop. The idea of staying in that stale corridor, listening to those distant voices, felt worse than moving forward. I turned the corner and saw a long, rectangular space. It might have been some kind of storage area or workshop at one point. Wooden tables stood against the walls, their surfaces stained with unrecognizable marks. Shelves lined the far end, empty except for a few scraps of paper. In the center of the room, I saw an old gramophone. It was the kind with a large horn attached, and it was spinning a record that produced that warped old tune. The horn faced the corner of the room, so the sound bounced around in an odd way. My flashlight beam made the metal glint. The chanting echoed all around me, but I didn't see anyone. The sound had no clear source. The gramophone record spun slowly, repeating the same melody I'd been hearing. My chest felt tight, and I swallowed hard. I walked toward the gramophone and knelt beside it. The record was scratched and dirty. I reached out to stop it, but as soon as I touched the arm, the chanting voices exploded in volume. It felt like they were screaming in my ears. I stumbled back and nearly dropped my flashlight. My ears rang. I noticed movement in my peripheral vision, as if shadows along the walls were swaying. I whipped my flashlight around, searching for any sign of a person, but there was nothing there. The chanting wouldn't stop. It blasted through my head, making it hard to focus. I grabbed my ears and closed my eyes for a moment. My heart pounded. I forced myself to breathe. After a few seconds, the voices faded back into a soft murmuring. I opened my eyes and stared at the gramophone again. The record was still spinning, but the needle was in the same groove. I braced myself, then lifted the arm off the record and placed it gently on its rest. The music stopped. The room went silent except for the dripping water. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. My flashlight flickered again, but held its beam. I felt the urge to run. I turned away from the gramophone, searching for an exit. There was a single door on the other side of the room. I hurried toward it, shining my flashlight around for any obstacles. I saw a chain on the floor, and a section of the stone looked like it had caved in at some point. I stepped around the debris and reached for the door's handle. The door opened into a narrow passage. The walls were rough, and I felt cold air blowing from somewhere ahead. I stepped through and closed the door behind me. The chanting seemed muted now, like it was coming from the other side of thick walls. The passage led me forward, and I saw faint moonlight shining at the end. It looked like an opening to the outside. My chest loosened a bit at the sight of that pale glow. I practically jogged toward it, the adrenaline making my legs move faster than before. The passage ended in a small, broken doorway. The frame was cracked, and I had to crouch to get through. I emerged behind the house in a weed-filled yard with a collapsing fence. The cool night air hit my face, and I inhaled it deeply. The sky was clear. I could see the moon and a few stars overhead. My body felt shaky and weak, but I was relieved to be outside. I hurried away from the house, stumbling through the tall grass and rotting wooden boards scattered around. I reached the fence, found a gap, and slipped through it. I was back on that deserted street, only now I was at the far end near another intersection. The house loomed behind me. From the outside, it looked even darker than before. The windows were shut tight now, even though I remembered them being wide open when I first saw them. I stood there on the sidewalk, catching my breath. My heart kept pounding, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. My mind raced with the details of what I'd seen inside. My throat felt raw. I needed water, and I needed to get far away from that place. The house was silent now. No music drifting out. No voices. I backed away from it, keeping my eyes on the windows. Nothing moved. No lights appeared. I turned and walked quickly, forcing myself not to look back again. My legs felt rubbery. My shoes left scuff marks on the pavement. A few blocks later, the streetlights were brighter, and I spotted a gas station sign in the distance. I didn't stop walking until I reached that station. The clerk looked up at me, probably wondering why I was sweating and panting so hard. I just grabbed a bottle of water and stepped outside again, not saying a word. I downed half the bottle in one long gulp, leaning against the wall. My fingers trembled, and I noticed I had a few splinters on my palm from the banister. My clothes were covered in dust and grime. I forced myself to breathe slowly, focusing on my surroundings. There were a couple of cars at the pumps and the hum of traffic on a nearby main road. No more creepy music, no chanting. I felt the night air on my face and kept telling myself I was out of that house. I know it was real. I heard those voices. I felt the floor collapse under my foot. I saw that old record spinning. I couldn't explain any of it. All I wanted then was to get home, lock my door, and try to sleep. I still don't know who was chanting or how that corridor seemed to stretch. I don't know why the doors slammed shut or why the windows were blocked inside. But I felt that place trying to keep me there. I haven't gone back. I still pass that neighborhood sometimes, but I refuse to walk down that street. When I drive by, I don't see the house. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong spot, or maybe it's just too dark to notice. But I feel uneasy every time I'm near that area, like something is watching. I can't shake the memory of those echoes following my footsteps or that moment when the voices roared in my ears. I haven't told many people about it because it sounds ridiculous, but I know it happened and I'll never step foot in that house again. All I can do is avoid it. If it's still there, it's there without me, and that's the only comfort I have. I'm done with shortcuts through deserted streets. I don't care how tired I am. I'd rather walk the long way home than risk another night trapped in a place like that. I walked into that basement with my heart beating hard. I had chased rare books for years. I had found them in old attics, abandoned barns, and forgotten storage rooms. But this place felt different from the first second. The used bookseller had whispered about a hidden library under a historic building. He said it was buried beneath layers of stone that no one touched for generations. He said it was the most secret place he knew. I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to stand among stacks that nobody had browsed for ages. I never expected to feel such pressure on my chest as I descended those steps. I was alone. The building's guard had taken a break, and the front door was old enough that it didn't squeak when I slipped inside. The corridor to the basement smelled stale. The walls were cracked and the light was dim. I used a small flashlight to see where I was stepping. My pulse pounded in my ears. My throat felt dry. I felt a chill, but I wasn't sure if it was from the temperature or my nerves. I kept going. I found a hidden staircase behind a heavy wooden door. It wasn't locked, but it was stuck. I leaned my shoulder into it, and it finally moved with a scraping sound. Behind it, I saw stone steps covered in dust. The edges crumbled when I tested my weight on each step. My flashlight beam flickered across thick cobwebs and shelves stacked with old crates. A few crates had rotted lids, and I saw strange shapes inside, like broken glass lamps and twisted metal stands. The air had a bitter taste. I felt it catch in my nose. I moved quietly. I didn't want anyone to hear me, even though nobody seemed to be around. My breath felt tight. Every time I exhaled, I heard the echo. I reached the bottom of the stairs and saw a low passage that led to another door. This door looked older than the first one. It had iron hinges and a greenish patina on the knob. I turned the knob and it opened without a sound. I stepped inside a large room and paused. My flashlight picked out rows of shelves. They stretched from wall to wall, with narrow aisles in between. I saw heavy tomes. They were covered in layers of dust so thick that I almost coughed just from walking near them. I tilted my flashlight to see how far the room went. The beam faded into darkness in the back. There had to be hundreds of books here. My hands shook a little. I love books, especially rare ones. I wanted to look at every spine and see if I recognized any of the titles. But as I stood there, I felt something. My chest felt tight again. The air felt heavier. I tried to swallow, but my throat was scratchy. I turned off my flashlight for a moment to listen. The room was silent. No drips, no footsteps overhead, no outside noise. It was dead quiet. I turned my flashlight back on and stepped between two tall shelves. The books here looked ancient. Some had covers made of thick leather with strange symbols pressed into them. Most had spines with writing I couldn't read. I saw letters I didn't recognize at all. I passed my hand across one cover and felt the dust coat my fingertips. The dust smelled old and a bit sour. I wiped it on my pants and kept moving, shining the flashlight on each book. My heart jumped when I heard a rustling behind me. It was a soft sound, like pages being turned. I whipped around and aimed the flashlight. No one was there. I stood still, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't see movement. I didn't hear footsteps, but I knew I had heard that sound. I paused for at least a minute. Then I forced myself to keep walking. The tension in my neck felt intense. My legs felt stiff. The next aisle was darker because the shelves were taller. My flashlight beam was weak in comparison to the darkness above. I stepped carefully, trying not to bump into anything. I saw piles of books on the floor, stacked without any order. Some were open, as if someone had left them in the middle of reading. The pages were yellow and brittle. I spotted diagrams drawn in thick black ink. I moved the light closer. They showed shapes that didn't look human or animal. I couldn't identify them. Their outlines twisted in ways that made my eyes ache. I couldn't decide if they were symbols or creatures. The pages had text in a script that looked jagged and uneven. I couldn't read a single word. I felt a sudden cold breeze against my face. My flashlight shook in my hand. I stepped back and almost tripped over a wooden stool. When I steadied myself, I heard another sound. Pages turning again, but louder this time. It was coming from farther down the aisle. My heart was racing. I tried to speak, but my throat felt stuck. I managed to say, "Hello?" My voice sounded weak. I moved toward the sound. Each step felt heavy. My shoes scuffed the stone floor and the noise made me cringe. The turning pages kept going like someone flipping through a book in a hurry. I aimed the flashlight at the end of the aisle. That's when I saw a tall book on a pedestal. It looked bigger than the others, with a dark cover and a thick spine. The front cover was open and the pages were moving on their own. I froze. The pages slowed and stopped. They settled on a spread that showed a detailed image of something. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. It looked like a circle of figures around a shape. The shape had tentacles or vines. The text around it was in that same jagged script. The ink looked fresh. I lifted my flashlight closer. My heart pounded so hard that my chest hurt. The pages felt alive. I thought I felt a pulse coming from the book, like a steady thump that matched my heartbeat. I reached out and touched the edge of the page. I felt a slight vibration. I snatched my hand back. I heard a faint sound, almost like a sigh coming from the pages. My mouth went dry. I rubbed my arms because my skin was covered in goosebumps. Then I heard movement behind me. I spun around and saw that other books had opened on the shelves. Their covers were bent back and the pages were stirring. Some pages shifted slowly, some faster. The noise filled the room with a continuous rustling. I stood in the center of that aisle, trying to keep my flashlight steady. My knees felt weak. The air was thick and my lungs felt heavy. The rustling seemed to become a pattern, like the library itself was breathing. I turned slowly, shining the light on the shelves. More books were opening. They were showing sketches and words I couldn't decipher. A few of them had color illustrations with bizarre shapes and diagrams of rituals. Some showed robed figures. Others showed bones and twisted plants. My scalp itched from the tension. I started to back away, but I heard a deep hum that I couldn't place. It vibrated through my body. I felt it in my chest and in my teeth. I tried to breathe slowly, but my breaths came fast. I didn't see any living thing in that room, but I felt a presence. My mind was buzzing with questions. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to see more. I hated that curiosity in myself at that moment. I took a few steps toward another open book. It lay on a small table near the wall. The cover had a symbol on it that looked carved rather than printed. It glowed faintly under the flashlight, or maybe that was my eyes playing tricks. I leaned in, shining the light on the page. I saw lines of text arranged in spirals around a central figure. That figure had multiple arms or maybe wings. Its eyes were wide and bulging. The edges of the pages had stains. They looked dark brown. I didn't want to guess what caused them. My temples throbbed. I heard a new sound. It was like a heartbeat, but it wasn't mine. It was slow and heavy, and it seemed to come from beneath the floor. Each thump sent a vibration up through my legs. I imagined something huge under the library, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was an old boiler or some machinery, but it didn't feel mechanical. It felt organic. The sound of flipping pages grew more frantic. Books around me were opening and closing in a random sequence. I saw one book slam shut on the edge of a table. The impact made a dull thud. Another book's pages fluttered so fast that the edges blurred in my flashlight beam. My ears were ringing. My chest felt tight, and I realized I was holding my breath again. I forced myself to inhale, but the air smelled thick and musty. It scratched at my throat. I began to feel dizzy. My vision blurred, and I stumbled back against a shelf. My shoulder struck a corner, and I felt a jolt of pain. I clenched my teeth. Books above me shifted. A few slid off the shelf and landed near my feet. I watched them fall, almost in slow motion. They hit the floor and sprang open. Their pages displayed drawings of shapes that hurt my eyes. My flashlight flickered. I slapped the side of it, and the beam steadied. I told myself I had to leave. My rational side was screaming at me to get out, but my feet wouldn't move at first. I felt drawn to the large book on the pedestal again. It was still open to that page with the circle of figures. The pulse I felt earlier was stronger now. I couldn't ignore it. It felt like standing next to a living creature. My arms felt numb, but I managed to put one foot in front of the other until I reached the pedestal. I stared at the illustration. The circle of figures had details I hadn't noticed before. Each figure had a twisted face with eyes that stared at me. I felt an urge to touch the page again to see if it would react. My hand trembled, and I placed my fingertips on the edge. The page felt warm. My pulse raced, and the page seemed to match it. Each beat echoed in my palm. I felt a tremor run up my arm and into my chest. My head pounded. I started to hear thoughts that weren't mine. Or maybe it was an echo of my own voice distorted by panic. The words said, "Stay." They said, "Complete the circle." I wasn't sure if I was imagining things. My breathing came in short gasps. I pulled my hand away, and the page fluttered like it was protesting. I stepped back, but my legs felt unsteady. I heard the books rustle again in a chaotic flurry. I turned around, and the exit felt far away. I forced my legs to move. My ears rang. That thumping under the floor felt closer. I tried to keep my eyes on the path between the shelves, but the dancing pages on either side made me twitch. My mouth was dry, and I couldn't swallow. I reached the main aisle and started toward the door. My flashlight caught glimpses of books snapping shut or flipping open. Some fell off shelves without any explanation. My footsteps echoed. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I made it to the door and yanked it open. Behind it, the narrow passage felt just as dark as before, but at least the air was calmer. I stepped out and slammed the door behind me. The sound reverberated through the corridor. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My hand shook so much that I almost dropped the flashlight. My teeth were clenched tight. I tried to process what had happened. I couldn't form a coherent plan, so I just focused on leaving. I turned and headed toward the stairs. My body felt weak. My knees threatened to buckle, but I kept going. Each step up felt longer than the last. I heard faint rustling behind the door, but it didn't follow me. I tried not to think about why. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw the wooden door I had pushed open. It was still ajar. I slipped through and closed it behind me. My heart was still racing, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I paused in the corridor, took a few shallow breaths, and then hurried toward the exit. I emerged into the ground floor of the building. The hall was empty. I saw a dim light coming through the old windows. The guard wasn't there. I walked out the front door and into the night. The cool air hit me in the face. My lungs expanded. I hadn't realized how stale the air below had been. I stood there for a moment, trembling. My thoughts swirled. The silence of the street felt unreal. I kept walking until I reached my car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the door. I got in and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. My pulse was still rapid. My lips felt numb. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't want to go home and try to sleep. I didn't know if I'd be able to. The bookseller's story had been true, and I had seen things I couldn't explain. I felt that pressure in my chest again, like a leftover imprint from those pulsing pages. I opened the window and let the night air wash over my face. I don't know if those books were cursed or alive or something else. All I know is that I've never felt a room breathe like that. I've never touched a page that seemed to have a heartbeat. I've never heard a silence so intense that I wanted to scream just to break it. I'm not sure if I'll go back. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to pretend I never found that library. But I can still hear those pages turning in my head. I can still feel that strange energy under my skin. Maybe it's curiosity, or maybe it's something else that got inside me down there. I can't decide. All I know is I'm not the same as before. I drove away and didn't look back. But I kept waiting for something to show up behind me or crawl out of my shadow. Nothing did. Not yet. I never thought I'd feel uneasy in my own home. Yet I was lying awake night after night, listening for sounds I couldn't predict, bracing for moments I never expected. When I decided to rent my guest room to strangers, I imagined casual travelers or tourists. I didn't imagine a silent presence that never seemed to leave, a locked door with no signs of anyone going in or out, and heavy footsteps that echoed when I should have been sleeping. My name is Daniel. I'm a regular guy who lives alone in a small two-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. I've got a decent job working weekdays at a local hardware store. A few months ago, I started renting my spare room online for a bit of extra income. Most guests were normal. They came with backpacks or suitcases, stayed a day or two, sometimes a week, and left. I rarely had any problems. Then a man showed up at my door one afternoon in late fall. He was tall, with short dark hair. He wore a long coat and carried a small bag in his right hand. I didn't notice anything strange about him right away, except for the fact that he didn't give me a name. He handed over the rental fee in cash and avoided eye contact. His voice was low and controlled when he said he would be staying for 4 nights. I just nodded. I asked if he needed anything, and he shook his head once without saying a word. It felt awkward, so I tried to break the tension by mentioning the Wi-Fi password and how the front door locks worked. He mumbled that he understood. I led him to the guest room. The room was small but comfortable. A twin bed, a small desk, and a wooden chair. Everything was clean. I saw him toss his bag on the desk. He gave a quick glance around. He still hadn't told me his name, but I didn't want to push. I just said, "Let me know if you need anything," and left him to settle in. I remember standing in the hallway for a moment, expecting to hear him move around, open a drawer, or even cough, but there was only silence. It was strange. Usually guests shuffle their stuff or ask about food options, but he didn't. By dinner time, I realized I hadn't heard him leave the room, and I hadn't heard a single sound from inside. The door was shut tight. I didn't want to seem intrusive, so I decided not to knock or call out. I fixed myself some leftovers in the kitchen and ate while checking my phone. I kept looking at the clock, expecting the door to open. It never did. I went to bed around 11. The corridor light was still on, and the guest room door was closed. I assumed the guy was asleep. Usually I wouldn't worry, but the lack of any noise made me uneasy. My bedroom is right across the hall, so it's easy to hear footsteps or doors opening. That night, everything was too quiet. I didn't sleep well. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a scraping sound that cut through the silence. It sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. It came from the guest room. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, slow. It kept going for a few minutes. I stared at the dark ceiling, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that maybe he was rearranging the room or something. But who does that in the middle of the night? My stomach felt tense. My mind raced. I imagined him pushing the bed or the chair around, but why? I listened until the noise stopped. Then I heard nothing else for the rest of the night. I eventually fell back asleep, though I had weird dreams about the furniture in my house being flipped upside down. When morning came, I got out of bed early. I wanted to see if the guest room door was still closed or if he'd left. The door was closed, just like before. No sign of him. I didn't hear any movement inside. Part of me wanted to knock, but I felt a nervous pressure in my chest that held me back. I went to work and tried to distract myself. When I got home in the late afternoon, the situation was the same. The door was shut and there was zero sound coming from inside. My curiosity was getting stronger. Normally, I'd check in with a guest to see if they needed clean towels or if everything was okay. This time, I hesitated. Something about that silence made me cautious. I ended up making a quick dinner of scrambled eggs and toast. I lingered in the kitchen, hoping the smell of food might bring him out. He never showed. That second night was worse. I went to bed around 10, once again noticing the guest room door was exactly where it had been all day, closed tight. Around 1 a.m., I heard dragging noises again. My chest tightened. I couldn't stay in bed. I got up quietly, walked to my bedroom door, and opened it a crack. The hallway was dimly lit by a nightlight near the floor. The sound was louder there, like a piece of furniture scraping against the wall. Then a loud thump. It made my heart pound. I stood there watching that closed door, expecting it to fly open. It didn't. The noises lasted a few more minutes, then stopped all at once. No more footsteps, no more dragging. Everything was silent. I waited, leaning against the doorframe, breathing a little too fast. My mind started racing through possibilities. Maybe he was shifting the bed around to be closer to the window or the heater. Maybe something fell, and he was struggling to move it back. But it felt too tense. Most people would at least come out and say, "Sorry for the noise," or something. The next morning, I was determined to at least knock on the door. But before I could, I found a small piece of black cloth in the hallway. It looked like it came from a torn jacket pocket or something similar. I picked it up and held it. It was coarse. I realized it was in front of the guest room, like it had slipped out from under the door. I bent down and listened for any sound. Nothing. I felt shaky. My mouth was dry. I knocked softly. No answer. I waited 10 seconds. Knocked louder. No response. I said, "Hey, you all right in there?" Silence. I tried the knob. It was locked. The door didn't budge. I stood there feeling a little sweat on the back of my neck. This was too weird. I thought about calling a locksmith or even the cops, but I wasn't sure if that was justified. He'd paid for 4 nights, and it was only the second morning. Maybe he just liked to keep to himself. Then again, the nighttime noises bothered me. I told myself I'd give it another day. If nothing changed, I'd call someone. At work, I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts stayed on that locked door. My boss noticed I was distracted, but I just blamed a headache. When I got home, the door was still locked and nothing looked different. The small piece of cloth I'd left on the kitchen counter was still there. No sign of him stepping out to grab it or anything else. I made dinner and kept my eyes on the hall. I felt like a guard on patrol. The door stayed closed. I ended up falling asleep on the couch around 9:30 with the TV still on. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps overhead. That was strange because there's no second floor in my house. It was more like something was crossing the roof or in the attic. But I don't have a proper attic either, just a small crawl space. My heart started hammering. I turned off the TV and listened. It stopped. I forced myself to go to my bedroom. I left the hall light on because I didn't want total darkness. I shut the bedroom door and locked it. That was something I never did before, but it felt necessary. I got into bed fully dressed. My body felt tense and my mind was alert. I heard the house settling, a few clicks and creaks, but no obvious footsteps. Eventually, I drifted off. Then I snapped awake to the sound of my bedroom door handle turning. The lock clicked. The door hinges gave a long, slow creak as it opened. My heart went from 0 to 100 in a second. My throat closed up. I couldn't see much because I hadn't turned on my bedside lamp. There was just a faint glow coming from the hall. The door was opening inch by inch, and I saw a shape behind it. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My hands gripped the sheets and my body felt cold. I heard slow, heavy footsteps on my bedroom floor. Then I heard breathing. It was deep and raspy, like it came from someone who'd just run a mile or was having trouble breathing. My chest felt tight with fear, but I kept my eyes on that figure. It moved closer, one footstep at a time. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice shook. There was no answer, only that rough breathing. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Every muscle in my body wanted to jump up and defend myself, but I was paralyzed by fear. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but my hand was shaking so badly I almost knocked it over. I tried to turn on the phone's flashlight. My finger fumbled on the screen and the light shot across the room. For a second, I saw a silhouette. It was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat. Then the figure turned around fast, like it was startled. I heard the footsteps retreating, and the bedroom door swung shut with a slam. I lay there, heart pounding, phone still lit in my trembling hand. That had to be my guest. But how the hell did he leave his locked room and get into mine? My mind spun. I got up, turned on the overhead light, and rushed to the door. The hallway was empty. The guest room door was still closed, as if nothing had happened. But I heard a faint click. I tried the knob. It was locked again. My skin was damp with sweat, and my breathing was loud in my ears. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed up with all the lights in my bedroom on. I stared at the door, half expecting him to come back. Nothing happened until morning. When the sun finally rose, I felt relieved but also exhausted. I made up my mind to handle the situation. I decided to call a locksmith if he wouldn't answer. I didn't care if it was an invasion of privacy anymore. I wasn't going to let someone roam my house at night without explanation. I pounded on the guest room door around 7 in the morning. My voice was firm. I said, "Hey, I need to talk to you right now." No answer. I tried again, louder. Nothing. So I called a locksmith and explained that I was locked out of a room in my own house. It took him about an hour to show up. He was a short, older guy in a gray uniform. I didn't mention the strange details. I just told him I couldn't open the door. He used some tools to pick the lock. It took a couple of minutes, and then the door swung inward. My stomach twisted. The room was empty. It looked the same as I'd left it, except the bed was shoved to the far corner. The desk was upside down, and the chair was on its side. The dresser was in the middle of the room. There were scuff marks on the floor, like something heavy had been dragged around. There was a single bag on the bed. It was open, but there was nothing inside. No clothes, no items, nothing. I felt like my brain was overheating. Where was this guy? The window was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry or exit. The locksmith gave me a puzzled look. I handed him his fee, and he left without asking too many questions. I walked around the room, checking under the bed, behind the dresser, in the closet. Nobody was there. I didn't understand how he got out or where he could have gone. I remember looking down at my hands. They were shaking. My heart was racing. I felt a sudden wave of relief that he wasn't there, but I also felt confused. How could he disappear like that? I noticed something else. The closet door had scratch marks near the handle, as if someone had tried to pry it open from the inside. I opened it. It was empty, just a few old hangers and a dusty shelf. But the smell in there was stale, like old sweat. I shivered. I grabbed the bag from the bed and turned it over. Nothing fell out. It was completely empty. There was no name tag or label. The pockets inside were torn. I didn't find a wallet or any ID. I wondered if the man planned to leave it behind on purpose. It made no sense. After a few minutes, I carried it out to the trash bin in my driveway and threw it away. The rest of that day, I stayed home, waiting to see if he'd come back. He never did. I still don't know how he left that room or how he walked into my bedroom at night. I changed the locks on my front and back doors. I nailed the guest room window shut from the inside. I checked every corner of my house several times. I didn't see any hidden passage or crawl space big enough for a person to slip through. There's no basement, and my roof doesn't have easy access. Even though I never saw him again, I couldn't shake the feeling that he might still be hiding somewhere. That night I moved a small dresser in front of my bedroom door before going to bed. I kept a flashlight next to my pillow. I didn't sleep much. Every time the house creaked, my eyes snapped open. It's been a while since that happened, and nobody else has rented my guest room. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear furniture scraping or footsteps in the hallway. I jump out of bed with my flashlight, ready to confront someone, but there's never anyone there. The worst part is that memory of my door handle turning in the dark, the slow creak of the hinges, and that raspy breathing. I can still feel it on the back of my neck when the room is quiet. I still don't know who he was or why he came here. I don't understand how he moved around without me ever catching him in the act, and I don't understand why he never showed his face after check-in. But I know one thing for sure. Those nights changed how I feel about this house. It doesn't feel like my safe little place anymore. It feels like a place where someone else's presence lingers, even though I never saw him leave. Now I always keep the doors locked, and I keep a chair wedged under my bedroom doorknob every night. I guess I just don't want to risk waking up to those heavy footsteps ever again. I saw that old pendulum clock in a cramped corner of the antique shop right after I walked in. It was a tall, dark wooden piece with a glass panel showing those motionless hands at midnight. Something about it felt wrong. The owner stood nearby, staring at me. He said there was no repair that could fix it and warned me it was a lost cause. I didn't care. I was hooked by the look of it. I don't usually believe in anything spooky, but that night I walked out with the clock in my arms, feeling uneasy without knowing why. I got home late, around 9 o'clock. I carried the clock into my living room and leaned it against the wall near the sofa. The place was already dim and the clock's face seemed to stare at me through the gloom. I remember rubbing my eyes, thinking I was just tired from work. My phone battery was almost dead, so I plugged it in. Then I flicked on a few more lights, trying to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house was silent. I heard the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint buzz of the ceiling lamp in the hallway. Everything looked normal, but my eyes kept drifting back to that clock. I studied it for a few minutes. It was dusty, and the wood had some scratches along the edges. The glass panel in front was clean, though, so I could see the two motionless hands, both frozen at 12. There was no sign of life in it. I tried gently moving the pendulum, but it just swung once or twice and stopped dead. I stood there, feeling a slight chill in the air. Then I decided to forget it for the moment. I was hungry, and I wanted to relax before bed, so I heated up a leftover dinner in the microwave and settled down on the sofa. The clock loomed to my right, but I did my best to ignore it. Around 10:30, I turned off the TV and headed to the bedroom. I brushed my teeth, changed into a t-shirt and shorts, and crawled into bed. I remember glancing at my phone. The screen said 10:46 p.m. Then I flicked off the lamp. I drifted off in a matter of minutes. I woke up to the sound of deep chimes. They were slow and heavy, like something you'd hear from an ancient church tower. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My bedroom was completely dark. The clock on my bedside table said 12 a.m. The red numbers glowed, but they looked blurry to my half-asleep eyes. Then I heard the second chime. It vibrated through my walls. I propped myself up on my elbows, heart pounding. The chimes continued, a total of 12. Each time the sound hit, I felt my chest tighten. My breathing got shallow. By the last chime, I was wide awake, covered in sweat. I fumbled for the bedroom light switch. My hands were shaking so hard I almost knocked over the lamp. When the light came on, my room looked normal, but I felt something shift in the air. The hair on my arms stood up. I realized those chimes had to be coming from the pendulum clock in the living room. But that clock was broken. It wasn't running at all. My heart hammered as I swung my legs out of bed and went to the hallway. I noticed a slight breeze. It passed over my bare arms and legs, even though all the windows were closed. The door to the living room was ajar, so I pushed it open. The light in there was off. The only illumination came from a small lamp in the corner of the hallway behind me, so the living room was mostly shadows. I saw the dark outline of the pendulum clock near the sofa. The face of the clock was still pointing at midnight and the pendulum was still. Nothing moved. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. The chills got worse. I stepped closer, feeling the wood floor under my feet, creaking with each slow step. A wave of cold air brushed past me again. Then I noticed something about the shadows in the room. They seemed to stretch out, reaching from the corners toward me. I blinked a few times, thinking I was imagining it, but they wouldn't recede. My eyes flicked to the clock, half expecting to see the hands ticking or the pendulum swinging, but everything looked stationary. I checked my phone. It still said 12 a.m. I tapped the screen to see if it had frozen. The screen lit up. Nothing changed. I tried waiting for the minute to shift. It didn't. Time on my phone was stuck, or maybe I was just too rattled to register normal seconds. My breathing got heavier and I felt sweat on my forehead. Something felt off. It was like the entire house was locked in that moment, pinned at midnight. Even the hum of the fridge in the kitchen seemed muted. I felt as if I was the only thing moving. Then I sensed a presence. I don't have a better word for it. I felt someone or something was in the room. My chest felt constricted. I whipped around, shining my phone's flashlight across the furniture. The sofa looked normal. The coffee table was clear except for a magazine, and the corner lamp was off. But there was a dark spot near the corner by the window. I couldn't make out a shape, just an area where the shadows seemed heavier. The breeze grew stronger, brushing my arms like cold fingers. My pulse pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I froze. My skin tingled. My mouth went dry. It was that feeling you get when you sense someone standing behind you, but there's no one there. I held my phone out, shining it at the corner. It was just darkness. I was scared to walk over. My legs felt like lead. I inched toward the clock instead. I wanted to see if maybe there was a hidden mechanism or a battery inside it that was causing the chimes. My heart thudded, but I forced myself to grip the side panel. The wood was smooth and cold to the touch. I pulled the front panel open. The pendulum hung there still. No sign of movement, no sign of any gear or battery that might be powering it. It looked like an ordinary broken mechanism, but I noticed an odor, like old books left in a damp basement. It didn't come from anything else in the living room, just the clock. I shut the panel and took a step back, rubbing the goosebumps on my arms. My phone still read 12 a.m. I heard a quiet rustling sound from the corner. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was soft, almost like clothing brushing against a wall. I turned, shining my phone's flashlight in that direction again. It revealed the corner of the room, bare except for the curtain that hung over the window. The curtain swayed, but there was no open window. My heart hammered, and I fought the urge to sprint back to my bedroom. Then the air changed. One moment it was cold, the next it felt normal. I stared at the corner, and the curtain stopped moving. My phone screen flickered and jumped to 12:01 a.m. The tension broke. The fridge hum returned. The house felt normal again, as if someone flipped a switch and brought the present back into motion. I didn't want to stay there. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door. I stayed awake until almost 2 a.m., just sitting in bed, checking my phone every few seconds to reassure myself time was moving. Eventually, I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. In the morning, I had this dull headache and a stiff neck. My alarm woke me at 7 a.m. I rolled out of bed and remembered the night before. I felt shaky and uncertain, but I forced myself to check the living room. The clock was still there, stuck at midnight. Everything looked perfectly calm. Sunlight came through the windows, lighting up the sofa and the dusty top of the clock. It made me feel a little better, like I had maybe overreacted. I picked up the phone to see if there were any missed calls or messages. The time was correct, 7:05 a.m. Everything seemed normal. I went to the kitchen, made some coffee, and tried to distract myself by scrolling through emails. But my mind kept jumping back to those chimes, the shadows, and the feeling of being watched. I thought about taking the clock back to the antique shop, yet a part of me wanted to figure out what was happening. I couldn't just ditch it without trying to solve the mystery, so I called a local clock repair service. The guy on the phone said he could come by next week. That was the soonest appointment available, so I agreed. Over the next few days, I worked my usual schedule. I left the house in the morning and came back in the evening. Nothing weird happened during the day, but every night around midnight I heard those same chimes, 12 in total, always spaced out, always echoing. Each time, my heart pounded. I felt the cold breeze, noticed the silent hush that fell over everything. Shadows would lengthen. I always checked my phone and saw that time got stuck for a minute or two. It never lasted long, but it always scared me. I tried turning on every light in the house, but that didn't stop the phenomenon. I tried covering the clock with a thick sheet, but I still heard the chimes. One night I put the clock in a closet at the far end of the house. Still, the chimes rang out. The shadows gathered in every corner. It was the same grim routine. The pendulum didn't move, but the clock tolled like it was alive. On the fifth night, I decided to test something. When I heard the first chime, I opened my phone's stopwatch. I wanted to see how long the weird pause lasted. My hand shook as I watched the stopwatch freeze at 0. The second chime rang. The screen didn't change. The world felt suspended. My stomach twisted. I cursed under my breath, trying to keep my cool, but my mouth felt dry. I heard a faint scraping sound near the hallway. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The chimes continued. I looked up at the closet door where I had shoved the clock, and I realized it was cracked open. I had closed it earlier, but now it stood open by about an inch. I stared, teeth clenched, feeling an icy sweat trickle down my spine. By the 12th chime, that scraping sound stopped. My phone's stopwatch suddenly ticked to 1 second, then 2, and everything was normal again. I sank to my knees, breathing hard. My heart hammered so loudly that my ears rang. I felt faint for a moment. I had this sudden urge to smash the clock into pieces, but I worried that might make things worse, like unleashing whatever was attached to it. So I left it alone. I paced around the living room, trying to calm down. The rest of the night was quiet, though I barely slept. A few days later, the clock repair guy, a middle-aged man named Kevin, arrived. I was anxious for some explanation. He carried a small toolbox and asked me to show him the piece. I pulled it out of the closet, feeling uncomfortable even laying hands on it. He took a quick look. He popped open the panel, examined the gears, and shook his head. "The mechanism's totally shot," he said. "Looks like it's been tampered with in a very crude way. Honestly, there's not much I can do." He talked about how some parts were missing and others rusted beyond repair. I asked if it could ever chime. He laughed, saying, "Not in this condition, that's impossible. The chime rods are intact, but the striking mechanism is broken." I thanked him and paid him for his time. After he left, I felt a knot in my gut. Part of me had hoped for a rational explanation. Instead, I was left with the knowledge that the clock absolutely could not be chiming. Yet I heard it every night. And every night time got stuck at midnight. I decided to record it. Around 11:30 that same evening, I set up my phone on a tripod in the living room, facing the clock. Then I turned off the overhead light and left a small lamp on so the clock was visible. I hit record and went to sit in the hallway, where I could peek around the corner. I waited. My heart pounded as the minutes ticked closer to midnight. At 11:59 p.m., the lamp began to flicker. I heard the first chime. I felt that same cold wave. My phone screen, in my hand, froze at 11:59. I counted each chime under my breath. My voice shook, and my whole body tensed. The air felt thick. By the 12th chime, I was sweating. I could smell that musty odor like old paper. I wanted to shout or run, but I stayed still. Then everything snapped back to normal. My phone jumped to 12:01 a.m. I rushed into the living room and stopped the recording. My hands were trembling as I played it back. The video looked normal up until 11:59. Then the footage froze, staying on the same frame for what must have been 30 seconds. After that, it jumped straight to 12:01. There was no audio of the chimes, just silence. Nothing had been captured except the still image of the clock. It was like reality glitched and left the camera behind. I realized I couldn't document this phenomenon for anyone else. It existed for me alone, locked to the clock. I felt trapped. Each night at midnight those 12 chimes would sound, the air would turn cold, the shadows would creep, and time would stall. Something roamed my house during that pause. I never got a good look at it, but I sensed it, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Smashing the clock might risk something worse, but keeping it felt like living with a silent threat that appeared once a day. I ended up moving the clock to the garage. I shoved it into a corner behind some boxes. That first night, the chime still rang at midnight, and the wind still swept through my house, chilling me to the bone. I sat on my bed, fists clenched, feeling helpless. After the 12th chime, time resumed. I didn't bother going to look. I knew the clock was untouched, stuck at midnight, mocking me. Now, every night follows the same pattern. I hear those chimes, and for a brief moment, the world outside stops. My phone doesn't advance a single minute. I can't make calls or send messages. I feel that presence somewhere in the darkness, always out of sight, always lurking. I sense it in the hallway or near the living room door. I lock my bedroom, hold my breath, and wait for the 12th chime. I've gotten used to the dread, but it still makes my chest tighten. Part of me wants to burn the thing or dump it on the curb and let someone else find it, but a stronger part of me is afraid that whatever is linked to that clock won't go away just because I get rid of it. Sometimes I wonder if this will go on forever. Always midnight, always those chimes. I'm stuck in this weird loop, and it happens every single night. So far, nothing has harmed me physically, but the fear is taking its toll. My hands shake more often, and I haven't had a good night's sleep in days. I'm writing this down because I need to let someone know. That old pendulum clock is still stuck at midnight, and I still hear it chiming. I don't know how to break the cycle. All I can do is wait for whatever is in those shadows to show itself, or hope it goes away on its own. Until then, I brace myself for midnight, every night. I still remember how that small stone face looked the first time I saw it. It was a rough piece of rock, carved into something that resembled a human head, except it had no eyes and no nose. It only had a mouth, and that mouth formed a tight smile that made me uneasy. At first, I tried to laugh it off. It was a gift, after all. But from the moment I placed it on my living room shelf, I felt this creeping sense that it was always looking at me. Even without eyes, it felt like it was staring. I tried to ignore that feeling, but it never stopped. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. My living room has a single window facing the street, a couple of worn-out chairs, a coffee table, and a modest shelf where I keep random decorations. When I got this statue, I didn't think much about it. I placed it on the top shelf to the right side, next to an old paperback I never finished reading. Right away, I noticed something about its posture. It had a slight forward tilt, almost as if it was leaning over the edge, trying to peek at me. I figured the carving was off balance, or that the shelf wasn't perfectly straight. I gave it a quick nudge to make sure it was secure, then went about my day. Later that evening, I sat on my couch, stared at my phone, and occasionally glanced at the statue. Every time I looked, I swore it was angled in a different way. Sometimes it seemed to tilt forward. Other times it was turned a fraction of an inch to the left. My mind kept telling me I was imagining it. I stood up, walked to the shelf, and adjusted it. Then I returned to the couch. A few minutes passed, and I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I looked again. It was turned slightly to the right, pointing toward me. My heart beat a little faster, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe the floor's uneven, I told myself. I fiddled with the statue again, tried to wedge a small piece of cardboard under it to keep it steady, and then turned on the TV to distract myself. After a couple of hours, I went to bed. I didn't notice anything else that night, but I felt on edge, like I was sharing the room with something watchful. The next day, I woke up, went into the living room. and found the statue facing me. It was angled out from the wall, as if it had rotated during the night. I stood there, rubbing my eyes. I didn't remember leaving it in that position. I didn't sleepwalk as far as I knew. I picked it up, felt its weight, and walked around with it in my hand for a moment. I inspected the smooth surface of the mouth, which was open in a small grin. The grin made me uncomfortable, but I still thought it was just a weird piece of art. I placed the statue back on the shelf and tried not to dwell on it. I got ready for work, left the apartment, and forced myself not to think about it too much. That day, my mind drifted back to the statue a few times, but I managed to focus on my tasks. I even convinced myself I had exaggerated everything. It was just a hunk of stone with a carved mouth. Still, I felt an urge to get rid of it, to drop it off at a thrift store or throw it in a box somewhere. But I also felt I owed something to the person who gave it to me. Maybe I would just keep it out of sight. That thought lingered. That night, I sat down in front of the TV again. The statue was on the shelf right where I left it. I watched a movie trying to calm my nerves. During a slow scene, I caught myself glancing at it. At first, I only noticed how the overhead light cast a shadow around its mouth. It made the grin look more pronounced. Then I thought I saw it move, just a tiny shift, like it was breathing. My heart jumped, and I felt a clench in my stomach. I turned the TV volume up and forced my eyes away from the statue. My palms got damp, and I kept wiping them on my pants. I couldn't focus on the movie. Eventually, I shut off the TV and walked to my bedroom. On my way out of the living room, I passed by the shelf. I tried not to look at the statue's face, but I couldn't help myself. It looked like it was leaning in my direction again. My mouth felt dry, and I walked out as fast as I could. Once I got into bed, I kept replaying the moment in my head, convincing myself it was a trick of the light. I forced myself to close my eyes. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I would drift off, then snap awake, sure I had heard something. I heard a faint scraping sound, but it was so quiet that I thought it might be my imagination. My heart pounded every time I heard that noise. Eventually, I got out of bed and headed to the living room. I turned on the light and checked the statue. It was still on the shelf, but it seemed closer to the edge than before. My skin prickled. I swallowed, picked it up, and turned it so it faced the wall. I told myself that if it was turned around again in the morning, I would know I wasn't imagining things. Then I went back to bed. In the morning, I walked into the living room right after getting up. The statue was facing forward, not toward the wall like I had left it. My head spun for a moment, and I felt the back of my neck grow hot. I thought I might be losing my mind. I set it down on the coffee table this time, deciding to keep an eye on it. While I went about making coffee, I kept glancing over. It didn't move as far as I could tell, but I felt uneasy every time I looked at it. Over the next few days, I noticed other strange changes. The sides of the face, which had been flat and featureless, started to show thin lines. They were shallow at first, but they grew deeper, almost forming small grooves where eyes should be. I ran my fingertip across the stone and felt how rough those lines were. It wasn't my imagination. The carving was different from when I first got it. I started to wonder if maybe it was some kind of cheap stone and was cracking, but the lines looked too deliberate. They curved just enough to suggest the outline of eye sockets. I couldn't ignore that. At night, I began hearing that soft scraping noise more often. I couldn't locate its source. Sometimes I would walk into the living room and flip on the light quickly, trying to catch the statue moving, but it always looked the same. Every time, though, I felt sure it was in a different position than before. Once, it looked like it was tilting upward, as if it were looking at the ceiling. Another time, it seemed to lean so far forward that I was amazed it hadn't toppled over. My hands trembled each time I tried to adjust it. I couldn't understand how a piece of solid stone could shift so subtly. One evening, the tension in my chest felt suffocating. I couldn't relax. I paced around the living room. I opened the window to let in some cool air, hoping that would help me breathe easier. The statue sat on the shelf, its half-formed eye sockets pointed in my direction. That grin looked wider than before. I stared at it from across the room. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a hissing whisper inside my head. It didn't come through my ears. It was more like a sharp pressure in my mind. It sounded like a voice. It asked me, "Who's really looking at who? And how much more are you willing to see?" I stumbled backward. My breathing got rapid and my hands shook. I didn't know if I was losing my grip on reality. I clamped my eyes shut for a moment, pressing my palms against my temples. The whisper didn't repeat. It was just a single moment. When I opened my eyes, the statue's grin looked sharper. The corners of its mouth appeared lifted, like it was smiling even wider. I walked over to it, grabbed it, and held it in my hands. I wanted to throw it out the window. I pictured myself opening the window and tossing it onto the street. But I felt afraid. My arms felt weak. I couldn't follow through. Instead, I put it back on the shelf and walked into the kitchen to splash water on my face. I spent the next few hours trying to distract myself. I put on some music, did some cleaning, and left the statue alone. But every few minutes, I'd look over and see it right there. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt trapped in my own apartment, like the walls were closing in. That night, the whisper returned. It came while I was brushing my teeth, just a faint hiss that made my ears ring. It asked me, "Are you sure you're the one in control?" My heartbeat pounded in my ears and I nearly dropped my toothbrush. I managed to rinse my mouth and then hurried out of the bathroom, not knowing what else to do. By the time I headed to bed, I was exhausted. My thoughts wouldn't settle, and my nerves were shot. I turned off the lights and lay down, but my eyes wouldn't stay shut. Every noise made me jump. Eventually, I dozed off. Sometime after midnight, I heard a low scraping sound in the hallway. My eyes snapped open and my pulse raced. I sat up, listening carefully. The scraping continued, followed by a soft thump. I got out of bed, moved slowly toward the bedroom door, and opened it. The living room light was off, but the faint glow from the street lamp outside gave me just enough visibility to make out shapes. I could see the silhouette of the shelf and the furniture. The statue wasn't where I had left it. I took a few steps in, feeling the floorboard creak beneath me. My feet felt heavy and my breath shook. Then I saw the statue on the coffee table. It was facing me, angled so that its partial eye sockets were directed at my chest. The corners of its mouth were turned up, like it was smiling at my fear. I reached for the light switch. The moment the light came on, I saw new changes in the carving. The grooves where the eyes should be were deeper than before. They looked like they might open any second. My stomach tightened and I could feel sweat on my brow. I noticed small scratches on the wooden surface of my coffee table, like the statue had slid across it. I sat down on the couch, my legs feeling weak. I tried to process what I was seeing. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there. The statue had moved and it had left marks behind. Its features were changing too. I picked it up again, and this time I pressed my fingers into the grooves where the eyes were forming. They felt rough and jagged, like fresh cuts in the stone. A weird warmth spread through my fingertips. It felt like heat, but not strong enough to burn me. It felt alive in some way. That made my heart thump harder. I realized I was talking to myself, mumbling things like, "This isn't possible," and "I'm just tired." I set the statue down on the couch next to me. I watched it carefully, waiting for any movement. After a minute, nothing happened. I got up, deciding I had to put it somewhere else. I carried it out to the hall closet and placed it on the highest shelf behind some old shoes. Then I shut the closet door. My hands were still shaking, but I felt a small sense of relief once the door was closed. I went back to the living room, stood there for a moment, and listened. No noise, no hissing, no scraping. That gave me a little calm, and I decided to stay up in the living room for a while, just in case. The night dragged on. I watched the clock, listening for any hint of sound. Everything stayed quiet. At around 4 in the morning, I forced myself to sleep on the couch because I didn't want to leave the area unattended. I dozed off and woke up with a stiff neck at around 7. When I opened my eyes, my first thought was the statue. I sprang up from the couch and rushed to the closet. The door was still shut, but my heart raced as I reached for the knob. I opened it. The statue was right where I had placed it. I felt a wave of relief, though I still sensed something lingering in the air. For the next few days, I left it in that closet. Every night I heard faint scraping sounds in the hallway. I tried using earplugs, but I could still feel vibrations sometimes, or sense that something was moving nearby. My nerves were always on edge, and I jumped at the smallest noises. The lines on the statue's face seemed to be growing each time I checked. The edges around the grooves were crumbling as if something was carving them deeper from the inside. The grin looked wider every time, too. I started to dread going home from work. My apartment felt oppressive, like the air was too thick. I began staying late at the office or stopping by a friend's place for an hour or two, just to avoid going back. But I knew I couldn't just abandon my own home. Every time I walked inside, I felt that statue's presence, even if I couldn't see it. The memory of that hissing voice stayed in my mind. It felt like something was pushing against my thoughts, trying to get my attention. One night, I noticed more scratching on the hallway walls, just a few inches above the baseboard. They formed faint lines trailing from the closet door toward the living room. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to rub them off with a cloth, but they wouldn't go away. They were shallow grooves etched into the paint. My hands trembled as I imagined the statue pushing itself along the floor, dragging against the walls. I decided to sit down on the couch and think about my options. I felt a pressure inside my head, like the whisper was about to return. My mouth went dry and my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to throw the statue out, but I worried that might make things worse. I worried it would end up somewhere else, or that it would find a way back. I just sat there, my legs shaking, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, and I was afraid. The presence of that thing felt stronger than my fear of change. For now it remained in my closet, waiting, its half-formed eyes staring through the dark. And I was in my living room staring back at the closed door, feeling every breath thump in my chest.